There was a white Supra that you were involved with?
That was the Ekanoo car.
That viral video that you guys saw of that 2J ripping it down this track was that car, right?
Yeah. It's actually safer to run more nitrous when you're using more boost. Stop bragging about how much f***ing horsepower you can make as a tuner. You do not make the horsepower. The person that designs the engine and puts the hardware together and the power adding device and all of those subsystems, that's what decides what the ultimate maximum capability of the engine is, not the jockey with the f***ing keyboard.
Welcome back to another episode of the Street Alpha Podcast. I'm your host, Tukes, and today we are at Bradenton Motorsports Park, a week before FL2K, and we have the pleasure of sitting with Shane T. Now, this has been highly requested for about probably the past year or so. I think I spoke to you maybe a year ago on Instagram, reached out to you to do a podcast, and it's just been super tough to get schedules aligned, but we're finally here. Now, before we start, I do want to give a huge shout out to Victor for making this happen. He allowed us to make this podcast happen here literally as of last night at 11 p.m.
Yeah, like 11 p.m. We're looking for a venue where, because I'm here for the offshore race in Clearwater, which is the west side, and you're from basically the east side. So we're trying to find a way to meet somewhere in the middle.
Somewhere in the middle, yeah.
And I think, you know what, maybe let me message Victor real quick and see if we could do it at the track somewhere. So literally at 10:45 last night, you know the story, obviously, and I'm just telling it for everyone else's benefit. And I message him, and he responds, and he's like, because I said, can we do it at your shop possibly, or maybe at the track?
Yeah.
And he's like, well, you don't come to my shop because I don't want you at my shop right now with what's going on over there. So you go to the racetrack. You can either use my race shop or you can use the tower. And I'm like, well, which one's got air conditioning? He's like, the tower. It's like, we'll use the tower then.
Yeah.
So he offered it up. And you know what? That goes to your point earlier about contacts, right? Mm-hmm. What's really amazing about the racing industry is it's actually relatively small. But dude, when people go out of their way like that to help you in your situation, and Victor, and it's like, that's why you got to kind of like pay it forward,
100%,
right? So, but it's really cool. So, super huge shout out to Victor and as you said, Induction Performance and obviously Bradenton Motorsports Park for hosting us.
Yeah, Victor always looks out. In the last year, I had a booth here last year. I'm not sure if I'm gonna have a booth there this year because my car is not ready yet, and that's every car guy story, right?
Thank God it's not my fault this time. Yeah. It's all right to be on this side of it.
Either way, we have Shane T. Now, Shane T has been tuning for probably over 2 decades now, 20 years roughly.
Yeah, I started professionally in 2001, but I was tinkering with my own stuff. I mean, from pretty much the point when I could pick up a screwdriver.
Right. So 20 years of tuning though.
20 years of professionally. So I started in 2001.
Right.
So we're 24 years, almost 25.
Yeah.
Yeah. 24 years.
A long time. So he's been tuning before like what we have now. We have luxury. We have all these ECUs that are doing cool stuff, and you probably didn't have all those things back then.
So the very first, well, yeah. I don't know how far back on the story or when you want to start this, but I actually built my own ECU when I was 16, 14, 15, 16.
I didn't even know that. I'm not going to lie.
Oh, yeah. So I didn't do it myself. So let's just cut that to the chase of that. One of the guys that worked for my dad was like an an electronics engineer. Uh-huh. And I built this go-kart, and I used a Briggs & Stratton engine. I went to the swap meet, and I bought like a little scooter, basically. Okay. And I took it all apart and turned it into a go-kart. I welded the chassis up. It was when I was 14. So I welded the chassis up, put the scooter together. I used like literal push scooter front wheels and handbrakes off a bike, like for front brakes. And then put this little Briggs & Stratton engine on the back of it. And I drove it around. So that was this summer when I was 14. I did that. Maybe it took me a month or I don't remember what. But I went and drove it around for like 5 minutes. Okay. And then I'm like, this is a slow hunk of shit. I need to make it faster. Well, we had all these parts also in the shop. And I saw this smog pump laying on the shelf. It's a little air pump that pumps air into the exhaust, like on a 60s, 70s, and 80s streetcar to help with emissions. So I'm looking at it, and I'm like, it looks like a little supercharger to me. So then I thought, well, I wonder if I could adapt it. So that's what I did. I set out to adapt it onto my go-kart, my Briggs & Stratton engine. Well, I don't know if you've ever played around with a Briggs & Stratton engine, but the carburetor is like, So the carburetor is, look, it's meant for two things, like rabbit and turtle, right? It's not meant for supercharging and, transients. And so I put the supercharger on it, and of course it won't run worth a shit. And there's a guy down the street that does quarter midget engines. And he's like, oh man, you're never going to get it to work that way. You need the carburetor on the front of the supercharger. So here's a little carburetor that we use on our quarter midget engines, mounted on the front of the supercharger, and do it that way. It's like, okay. So I changed it around to that, and that was way better. It would run, but it would have a huge hesitation. Like when you went after the throttle, it would like stumble like crazy and then blow black smoke, and then it would finally take off and go.
Right.
So I was trying to get the carburetor to work right, and one of the guys that works for my dad, Jeff Ellis, he comes over one day and he's like, hey, why don't you put electronic fuel injection on that? It would make it run a lot better. And I'm like, okay, what's electronic fuel injection? So he's like, oh, here, let me show you. Gets an injector, and he's like, look, this is an injector, and fuel goes in here, and then it comes out of there.
Right.
So why don't you get this mounted in the intake manifold, and here's a little Bosch fuel pump and a regulator, and the fuel comes into this and out there to the regulator and then back to the tank. So you need a little tank, and the injector goes in the middle. Get all that rigged up on your go-kart, and I'll come over later this afternoon and after work, and we can build a little circuit that can trigger off of the points and fire that injector.
Right.
So I'm like, oh, great. Sounds awesome. So like 2 years later, we're still trying to get this to run. By now, I've gotten rid of the go-kart.
Right.
I mount the engine on a stand. We've got the supercharger. Him, me, and my dad are spending hours on this engine because it evolved into full ignition control. We're using a DIS coil pack, had twin spark plugs. I welded the cylinder head up and put a second spark plug in the top of the head. I mean, dude, it just goes on and on. Like,
wow.
I welded the camshaft up. I bought another engine, and I took the camshaft out of that one, welded the lobes up with a stick arc welder, and then ground them on the bench grinder by hand. I put so much lift in that the valve hit the head, and then I just ground the cam down until the valve didn't hit the head anymore, and then just put it in. And it was nasty. Things sounded like a Harley. Wow. Right. And so anyway, so the fuel injection part of it, we ended up with a photo optic crank trigger because we could not figure out how to get the noise from the ignition to not interrupt the signal going into this. So this computer we built really wasn't a computer. It was a 555 timer circuit. And it had two adjustments on it, two screwdriver adjustments, one for idle and one for off idle. And then it had a switch that told it when the throttle was closed. So it would switch to the idle circuit and then go to the not idle circuit when you open the throttle.
Yeah.
So yeah, we ran this thing on 100% nitromethane, built our own circuit boards for it, hand assembled all this stuff. And so that was my start in tuning and EFI, was when I was 14, 15, 16.
Well, I'm sure that start is a lot more than most people would have.
Well, so this I get this all the time. People are like, man, where can I go to school to learn what you learn? I'm like, you can go, there's lots of schools you can go to. I can recommend them, like HP Academy and obviously Ben Strader EFI University. But you're not going to be able to know what I know because I've been doing this since I was 15 years old.
Right.
So, this is how I know. When I started at Motec, I realized like I'm doing what I'm meant to do because every skill I had developed leading into that, I was using to great effect. Right. So I know I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing on this planet, other than being a dad, which is
which is the new
its
thing.
own set of challenges, but also super rewarding.
Just so people know, right? Because that was a fantastic intro into how you got started, right? Interesting, really interesting story.
It's all bullshit. I made it up just now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's all AI.
So you, just so people know who you are,
like
you have been involved with several different pro mods over the years, right?
Sure.
High horsepower, 4 cylinders, right? SR20.
Yep.
Still record holding SR20 or? Oof. At the time, it was.
No, it's not. No, because they've outdone it. They've been 580s now with the Hondas.
Okay, so...
look, it might be a record. Maybe an SR. It might be. I mean, look, I'm pretty sure the same car that I just did a couple weeks in Australia with a bigger turbo, I'm fairly sure that's the most anyone's ever made with one.
So 2,000 plus horsepower in SR20.
2175 at the wheels.
Right. So SR20, 6-cylinder. You had Ekanoo. You were involved with him as well.
Yes.
Which... Obviously, you've been watching.
We could spend a whole podcast doing that. Yeah.
So, and that there was a white Supra that you were involved with.
Yeah.
So
that was the Ekanoo car.
That viral video that you guys saw probably I don't know how many years ago now of that 2J ripping it down the track was that car, right?
Yeah. Well, it didn't start out white. The involvement with Ekanoo started in 2000, I think, 4 at Bullish. So George and Ara was the owner and George was the tuner. Mm-hmm. George and Ara split, and so George went and opened his own shop or something like that, and Ara kept Bullish open. And they needed a tuner for this car that they had just finished building, which was this yellow street Supra for what turned out later to be Ekanoo, Ibrahim Canoe. So from Bahrain. So anyway, they told me, look, they hired me from Motec. I flew out to Bullish, and they said, look, this is for this guy in Bahrain. Means nothing. I don't know where that is. Ibrahim, and it's a street Supra, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah, whatever. Fine. So we get it on the dyno, and it makes like, I think, either 1,045 or 1,075 at the wheel, which was insane for the time.
For that time, yeah.
And so I got it all done, and off it went to Bahrain, and I never thought about it again. Mm-hmm. Then I met two guys that used to have the Twins Turbo. So they used to have a TV show called Super Tuner, and I met them because they, in fact, they worked for Vinny 10, and they moved to California. Yeah, to do some work in California. So they moved out there, opened their own shop, and then they got this TV show, and then they were building a car for the show, a Supra, and they wanted to put a Motec on it. So they get a hold of Motec. I worked at Motec, obviously, in California, which was maybe only 25 minutes away from where their shop was.
Right.
And so they wanted to use a Motec, but they wanted to promote it. So they were like, look, give us a discount on it, but we'll promote it heavily. We want you guys to come here, be on our television show. So my boss is like, yeah, it's a good opportunity. Let's get involved. So they got the Motec parts. Wiring shop did the wiring harness. And then I came over the day we're going to put it all together and make it run. So when I get there, it is woefully nowhere near being done, right? Like I get there at like whatever noon, and this thing's like not got the engine in, and I mean they're still assembling,
right?
But they're doing it. I can't remember what they must have had film days or something. Like I don't know. Remember why there was a reason why it had to be done super quick, or we couldn't I just come back? Yeah. But anyway, it was like, oh shit, these guys don't need. I can't use the laptop for hours.
Right.
But what I can do is use my hands because I know how to work on cars too. So then I just jump in the foray with them and start thrashing, and we stay up all night and get it done. And I don't leave, right, because the car's not done. And then we get it done in the morning, do all the electronics, test, check, fire it up, put it on the dyno, and run on the dyno. So that was like, then from that point on, they're like, you're our guy. We are only ever going to use you to tune our cars because no one's ever put that level of dedication in. Right. And then I can't even remember if the thing made it to the television program or not, but anyway, that was in fact.
But that was the start of your involvement with them.
With them, yeah. So what happened was with the Twins, they're like, dude, check out this Supra. Look at the video of this Supra, and there's this yellow Supra in the Middle East, racing out in the desert and like smoking. Well, it was probably GSXRs then, or maybe it was Hayabusas, but anyway, like it's just outrunning them like crazy, and we're like, dude, that Supra's sick. That thing's killer. And you would see in the videos on YouTube, like, all these people wearing thobes and the Middle East garb, and they're like standing out in the middle of the desert on a freeway, and they're like it's like the sea parts as these two things run through the crowd, and it's like these motherfuckers are crazy, right?
Are legendary though,
right?
Yeah.
All right, so 2006 rolls around, I get a call from someone in Dubai. Hey, we want you to come to our shop. We have a Supra. And we have all these hill climb cars because that's kind of their motorsport over there is climbing up sand dunes. And we want you, and they all have Motec on them. We want you to come and tune them. And so we're gonna have race cars, and we're gonna do racing. And so you just move here, and we'll get a house here, and you can live here. And I'm like, are you for real? Like, this motherfucker must be out of his mind. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. But they're like, they call me several times. And every time they're cutting the time frame down. And so in 2006, I quit working at Motec. I'm now under contract with Christian Rado, right, for his front wheel drive drag car, and I can't leave because of my contract with him. And I don't want to. I'm not going to fuck my contract up in the U.S. to go play with some piece of shit, and I don't even know where it is, right?
Yeah.
So, but every time they call me and I say no, they call back and they keep raising the price, right? They keep running the number up. So I think the last offer was something like, okay, we'll fly you first class. We'll put you in a first class hotel. We will limo you back and forth from the hotel to the dyno. And we will pay you. You'll leave on a Saturday, or you leave on Monday and you'll come back on Sunday, and we'll pay you $10,000 cash. And I'm like, listen, it could be $100,000. I don't have the fucking time, right? It's not going to work. Fine, they go away. 2007, I'm at test days at Daytona, actually with the IMSA team I worked with that year.
Okay.
And I get a phone call, and it's George from Bullish, and he's like, hey, remember the car you tuned for the guy in Bahrain? Yeah. He bought our race car, and he's now got it in Bahrain. He needs somebody to come over and tune it. They put an automatic in it. Do you want to go do that? Well, I'm thinking, okay. So I have a better contract in 2007 where I have more freedom.
Right.
So I'm like, yeah, I could do it. Have him call me. So he calls me, and I'm like, I just lay the same line of shit on him. I'm like, I want first class. I want fucking this much money, and I want to leave on this day and come back on this day. And I know that's crazy, and you're not going to do it. So see you later. And he's like, no, that sounds fine. When can you come?
Yeah.
So I'm getting married at the end of January. He wants me to come like immediately after that. So I do. I get married, and like the next week I go for 10 days to Bahrain to tune this car. They were trying to get the car to run in the in the 10s.
Wow.
It went 912.
Damn. So they were trying to go for 10s and went 912.
Yeah, they went 912. So they were like, it almost went in the 8s, right? No, they were trying to go in the 9s. Sorry, so they were trying to go under 10 flat. But that's that's how the hook got set.
Yeah.
So that's when I started with Ekanoo, and I was happily working for them and did way more than that. We set multiple world records, with that team in almost every category we entered. And that was an 11-year run, and that was fantastic. And I can't thank those guys enough for putting me basically on the world global scene and having the focus be on me for the whole entire world.
That is awesome. So what did that car run? What was like the fastest it went?
The drag car or the
white
drag car?
Drag car?
The white drag car, proper Supra with IRS, I think went 712.
712
with IRS. Maybe it might have been 17. Somebody else might have went 12. But then we switched. We took that car and then switched it. So by the way, there was multiple white Supras.
Yeah.
Right. So the one got right around when that thing became, I think it went 798, and right around then, which I think was probably 2010 or 9, he commissioned Titan to build him another Supra that was basically would have been like a Pro Mod Supra almost. I mean, it was 3/4 chassis. Yeah. It was a proper Supra chassis, shell. Right. And then they put a full tube chassis inside of it. It would have been called a 3/4 chassis. But, a Liberty, clutch. I mean, they basically took the Titan format that they were running ADRL with and kicking the shit out of everybody with. and we turned it into a Supra.
Yeah.
Right. And the concept with that was to have it over there and be able to run in the 6s. Well, that car is the first 5-second import. That's the first car that ran 597 was that car. It went all the way from we want to run in the 6s to now we're trying to run in the 5s.
So, but that's the
the first import 5-second pass was that car.
Yeah, but
that was the white Supra.
That's the car I'm talking about.
Yeah, all right. Well, so the original car was gray, onyx gray or whatever that color is, and that's the one I went over for in 2007. It was the second car that Titan built that was the first in the 5s. And they looked identical, but one, and to be completely honest, like the original one, at one point, our goal became to run in the 7s. And then our goal was, well, I wonder if we could run quick enough to beat Titan's number, which was 759.
Yeah.
So we had gotten to the point where we were right at the cusp of that, and we went 759. But the other car had shown up. And one car is an old car, and it's half stock suspension shit. I mean, it's not a real race car. Right. And then there's this bitchin' thing that we've just spent a year working on where I got to choose every piece of electronics I wanted to use and do all the most outlandish, crazy things. We had paddle shift in it and program all of it and do all this stuff and have all these sensors and all this data. And obviously it makes a bunch of power and it's methanol. And I mean, it's everything I want to do. And then there's this other one that I'm kind of bored with and is not nearly as fun. Yeah. So when the new Supra shows up and debuts, I'm like, fuck this thing. I'll just blow this motherfucker up so I don't have to work on it. So what we used to do, we had 2 stages of nitrous, and we would spool with one and then switch to the other and then turn it off after the thing made boost to make runs. So I'm like, well, I'm just going to leave it on for 3 seconds and see what happens. So I do, and it goes 744. And it's like, holy shit. Okay, it's staying on the entire way down the racetrack, and you know what else? It's getting the other one all the way down the racetrack. Right. 733. We made a jump in fucking 2 runs from 759, 744 or 42, 733. And then it was like, okay, now I'm interested in that one again. Yeah. What's interesting about that, and this will lead into your question, is that I learned something there, which was really weird. They were the ones that wanted to run 2 stages of nitrous back when we started in 2008. They wanted a 250 shot and a 150 shot. I'm like, you are fucking smoking crack. This thing is going to blow up all the time. There is no way you're going to run a 150 shot and a 250 shot and not break it. No, you'll see everybody does it. No. So it broke itself all the fucking time. We would run I think we started out with 40 pounds of boost, and then over time, we're running 50 pounds of boost and then 60 pounds of boost and then 7 because you keep putting more turbo on it, turn it up. This is C16, right? This is the gasoline engine. And so you'd spray it for a little ways down the racetrack, but eventually the nitrous always was a problem. And it would blow itself up when the nitrous was on. And then when we got the other car with the clutch, and it's like, this is so much easier with a clutch. It never breaks, right? Running on methanol, right? And then you've got all this nitrous and all these problems and all this shit, and it always blows itself up. And so I learned when I went to blow it up intentionally and it wouldn't blow up, because by then we're running a 94 or whatever it was and like fucking 85 pounds of boost.
Yeah.
What I learned was, counterintuitively, it's actually safer to run more nitrous when you're using more boost. Because if you look at it on a percentage basis, let's just say it very simply. Let's imagine we have an engine that produces 1,500 horsepower with no nitrous. So, a 150 horsepower shot on that is a tiny percentage of the total power that the engine's making based on nitrous oxide. Now, if we start putting a 1,500 horsepower shot on it, half of the power we're trying to make is coming from nitrous. There's no way that's going to live. But the more you dilute the nitrous with air, the more nitrous you can run before you get to that limit. It's the same in pro nitrous. This is why pro nitrous drag car engines are almost 1,000, or some of them are over 1,000 cubic inches. Because if it's a 632, you get to a limitation where you start trying to put enough nitrous in where it just blows up all the time.
Right.
And the way to solve it is make the engine bigger. Because then that same amount of nitrous on a larger air volume or air mass is less oxygen percentage, right? There's more oxygen, obviously, because there's more air as well.
Yeah.
But if you dilute the nitrous with air, it's the same as imagine using like a 12 horsepower shot on something.
So how do you find the limits of how much nitrous you can run then?
Well, you learn from experience, right? And every engine is different. But that's what's so amazing about these little 6-cylinders. I mean, you have to spray them when you use a converter and not a clutch to get them to drive through the converter so you can get them to launch, right?
Yeah.
And the most dangerous time is not when it's making boost and you're spraying it with nitrous. It's when you're spraying it at 2,500 RPM against the converter and you only have the displacement of that little bitty engine, which at that RPM, let's just imagine a 2J, right?
Okay.
A 2J with no boost at 2,500 RPM probably makes 65 horsepower.
Okay.
And then you're going to spray it with a 150 horsepower shot of nitrous. That is way, way backwards on the nitrous percentage of horsepower versus engine percentage of horsepower, right?
Okay, that goes into what you're saying,
right?
Basically
So
what your theory is, right?
So you'll see them always like half the time they're backfire, shut off, like burn a fucking piston, do whatever damage they're going to do. They're going to do it right then, because you're making them operate in this way unbalanced way with the amount of nitrous you're using. So back to what I was saying, counterintuitively, the more boost you can run, the more nitrous you can run. So to your point, that car you saw that I was working on that I think it made 2560, right, at the wheels with no nitrous. When we sprayed it with both units, that's where the ring gear explodes and it kills the converter, catches on fire, and everybody thinks it's AI generated or whatever. So it made 2770 when it broke the flywheel. It'd probably make more than that if we got a chance to tune on it.
Yeah.
But that was like a 67 and a 72 is probably like about 100 and... No, it's probably more like 300 horsepower worth of nitrous.
Wow.
And that one, the other one you saw made 3,200. That one's claimed to be 500 horsepower worth of nitrous. But I believe it because if they're running I think they run 107 pounds of boost on that. So that engine on its own probably makes like, I don't know, 2,800.
Yeah.
So now you're going to only add 500 to 2,800. That percentage is tiny compared to trying to add 1,200 to 1,200. See what I mean?
Right.
You're far further away from the danger zone when you add more air.
Since we're on the topic of that, right? One of the things that you had mentioned in a previous, I'm not sure if it was a podcast or something like that, was air density, right? And the importance of it and how it can lead to more power, right? So there's air density and there's also fuel density as well, which is important, which people don't really speak about too often. But can you talk about the importance of air density and how it plays a role in making power?
Yeah, I mean, air density is key, in the end. What determines the power output of any engine is its mass flow rate. And mass is the combination of volume, which is what the displacement of the engine is volume.
Okay.
And the density of the air charge that it's consuming, right? So density is a combination of air pressure and air temperature,
right,
and water vapor.
Okay.
So the best density is no water vapor, as cold as it can possibly be temperature-wise,
Okay.
and the highest possible pressure. But there's something called the standard atmosphere at sea level, where they consider it mean sea level, not high tide, low tide, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
There's a standard which says that the air density at sea level is 101.325 kPa at a standard temperature of 15 degrees C or 59 degrees Fahrenheit, right? And so that's considered 1.0 if you want, or your reference.
Okay.
So wherever you exist on the earth compared to that reference gives you a direct percentage of the amount of power any engine will be capable of making under those conditions.
Okay.
So
understood.
So let's take the first example. You're going to go to Pikes Peak. The top of Pikes Peak is 14,115 feet above sea level, right?
Okay.
The air density there is roughly 61% of what it is at sea level when you compare to that standard sea level day. Now, listen, obviously at sea level, some days it's warmer than 59.
Right.
You have atmospheric changes due to weather that change the barometric pressure, right, a little bit up and down. But that standard 101.325 and 15C or 59F is the standard with dry air.
Okay.
Right. So then what happens if you get moisture in the air like you have in Florida? The water vapor raises the pressure of the air. The temperature lets the air expand, so there's less molecules in any given volume.
Right.
And the water vapor displaces the oxygen also, right, or the air. So wet air is less dense. Another counterintuitive thing. Wet air is less dense than dry air, but it's because water vapor occupies something like, 1,000 times more volume than liquid vapor does. So when it's raining and it's like, oh, it must be really humid, it's raining. No, it's actually not that humid because the rain is concentrated in a big droplet instead of being vaporized into little molecules that push the oxygen out of the way.
Right.
Right. So
that's it. Oh.
So anyway, back to Pikes Peak. So you're at 61% of the density that you would have at sea level. So what that means is if you take a 1,000 horsepower engine at sea level, right, and go to the top of Pikes Peak, if it's tuned exactly the same, right, so you don't let the mixture change because the air density is lower. You do a good job there because you got a good ECU, right, with the right compensation in it, and you run the correct amount of ignition timing that it requires at that pressure.
Right.
That engine makes 610 horsepower up there,
right.
tuned perfectly, right? Tuned imperfectly, it makes even less than that, right? But that's the struggle, and so that's exactly how it works in every engine. And it doesn't matter what engine it is because they all run under the same laws of physics.
Right.
I mean, you don't have to believe me. You can go argue with Newton, right? So then it comes down to the engine's capability or power capability is going to be dependent on how much of that air it can effectively move through itself over a given amount of time, mass flow, right? So we take a given volume, which is the fixed displacement of swept volume of the cylinder.
Okay.
And how much air can we actually process through it? So an engine is actually a volume flow device. It doesn't guarantee that it flows the same mass every cycle when you pull air in. Because you have restrictions like ports and things like it takes longer when you have the engine revved up, there's less time to get air in, right? So you have all these things that affect its efficiency, right? So if you just did the math without running the engine, it would be very simple to say we know what 1 cubic foot of air weighs at sea level, right? And we know the displacement that this engine can sweep through itself. And if we assume that the engine's a perfect pump, there's no inefficiencies, then it's literally just the weight of the air that the engine displaces. There's its air mass, right?
Okay.
So we know that. Now we're trying to mix fuel in proportion to the air mass by the fuel mass, right? So it's very simple. Like we'll use an easy term everyone knows. It's going to be gasoline, right? So stoic on gasoline is 14.7.
Right.
That means we require to completely combust 1 pound of fuel, we need 14.7 pounds of air.
Right.
Right. So, and we want it in that proportion, 14.7 to 1. So if we have a known mass of air based on the volume displacement of the engine being perfect, and we know that what the air density is, we know exactly the amount of air we're using, we can then easily do the same thing for the fuel. What's the temperature of the fuel? What's the density of the fuel? And once we know the density, we want to mix it at 14.7 to 1 mass. We know what the fuel density is. So therefore, we can easily calculate the fuel volume we require to get that mass and stick it in the engine. And that's how every ECU on the planet works.
I don't think anyone's ever broken it down that way, but I feel like I'm in school right now. I like this. It's been a while. So I feel like I should be taking notes.
Again, AI, I just made it up.
So now, fuel. These fuel pumps draw a lot of amperage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they can, especially with a lot of power they're making now. It's 85 and so on. So with these fuel pumps drawing a lot of amperage, wouldn't that lead to more heat, technically?
Yeah. So look, this is like one of my pet peeves, right? Is electric fuel. So I've developed over the years a sort of, for lack of a better term, standing get fucked policy on anybody who's trying to make more than about 1,000 horsepower.
Okay.
Right, with an engine, and trying to use an electric pump to do that, because the amount of mass fuel flow that you need.
Okay.
And at the because typically things making more than 1,000 horsepower are something boosted. I mean, it could be something big that makes almost 1,000 horsepower. It could be normally aspirated, which maybe wouldn't be a problem. But anything making more than 1,000 horsepower is relatively highly boosted.
Right.
And so then you're going to be requiring a lot of pressure, right? Fuel pressure in order to keep up with that boost. And so the more pressure you make a fuel pump make, the more current it draws to be able to make that pressure. And so the first problem is you're like fucking drawing 50 amps out of your electronic system, or the battery, which your electronic system is requiring to fire the ignition and do all of these things. And that doesn't make sense. Mm-hmm. And then the electric pumps that are capable of making, actually capable now, not advertised, because all of them are advertised to do it, but not many will actually do it. It just doesn't make any sense not to use a mechanical pump. I mean, so you put a small primer pump on it, run a mechanical off the engine, and now with a mechanical pump, because it's a positive displacement, it requires, I don't know, whatever, 3 horsepower, 6 horsepower to make whatever pressure you want. I mean, we're talking up to maybe 200 or 300 PSI.
So that's the parasitic draw of running that. Basically.
Yeah, it's like nothing. Okay. And so instead you let your alternator draw 50 or 60 horsepower out, smoke all the wires trying to charge the battery with. So you can see like this is starting to get me a little bit heated, right? Like I cannot stand.
Literally.
Okay, and so the only actual pumps that will do that job correctly are, and it's actually really not about the pump. I mean, it is. The pump's got to be there capability-wise. But you need a controller like the ID pump controller.
Fuel pump controller,
right?
Yeah.
The brushless controller that they spent literally like, Paul, look, dude, we needed this 10 years ago, and you talked about it 10 years ago, and it's like just barely out in the market.
Yeah. But now, even with that, though, don't you still have to run a high fuel pressure?
Oh, 100%. But you have a controller and a pump that's actually capable of delivering the volume, right?
Okay.
Because it monitors basically pump speed and keeps the pump speed up. Anything that's not monitored and controlled, the more you load it, in other words, the more pressure you try to make, the slower the pump goes, right? And the pump's trying to keep up, but it can't.
Right.
Well, this thing revs the pump up to a specific RPM and holds it there, so the volume never changes. It's a closed loop system, and that's why it works, and that's why it's so expensive.
Now, back on this density situation, right? Now, that was just on the electrical side.
Yeah.
Right? There's draw, right?
Right.
So now, what about on the mechanical side when you have pressure?
It goes back to the same thing again. Like you have a mechanical fuel pump that's hooked to the engine. It runs at crankshaft, or it's hooked to the engine. So it revs up with engine speed and it revs down with engine speed.
Right.
So when you're at an idle, it's turning the slowest it can possibly turn, and its volume that it's delivering is the least amount it'll ever be. So you're cycling from the tank to the engine into the pump, and returning back maybe 2 gallons a minute, because your engine only requires 1/10 of a gallon a minute to idle. I'm just making up numbers. Okay. Now, when you rev the engine up and you make 2,000 horsepower, now you need way more volume, but the fuel pump speeds up in proportion to the engine.
Right.
So the volume goes up. Now the demand and the requirement match, right? The supply and the demand match. So now it's moving 8 gallons a minute, but you're only doing it while you're making that power. Now, when you run a standard electric pump that just runs as fast as it can run as soon as you put power to it, whatever its maximum capacity is, it's always moving that volume through the system. It's going up to the engine and turning around and coming back to the tank, and going up to the engine, turning around and going back to the tank. Now, listen, on a drag race car or a Bonneville car, that doesn't matter. But in a sports car or any endurance thing that's running, or a street car, you're just if you just go out there and turn your fuel pump on and let it run, the tank will get hot. I mean, it's just how it works. Did you ever put your hand on the outlet of the compressor? I'm sure everyone has, and burned your hand on it. Yeah, because when you compress things, they get hot. It gets hot, which is the whole problem with the air density side of it on the boost side, right? The supercharger. This is why supercharger is so shitty compared to a turbo, because a turbo is far more effective at making high pressure than a compressor is. You know, a roots compressor.
Right.
So
is it safe to say that you technically should, on an endurance vehicle, right, should maybe run a deadhead setup?
No, the problem with deadhead is you end up with air in the line. I mean, you undoubtedly end up with air in the line, because if it doesn't hold pressure on that deadhead system when you turn the car off, the heat soak vaporizes the fuel because it gets too hot and it boils. So it literally just turns into foam, and then it won't start. Any kind of high performance thing, I would never run a deadhead system on. The great part of a return system is it'll pump all that fucking air out and put it back in the tank.
Also, it's an air thing.
Yeah, it's more of an air thing. And there's also problems when you start trying to use big volumes on a deadhead system.
Okay.
Of pulsations in the rail that aren't damped out because they're on the end of this fucking stovepipe that just lets the pressure spike all over the place.
Yeah,
I mean, luckily, no one puts a pressure sensor in there that's fast enough to read it and logs it fast enough to know, or else none of us would ever want to start an engine in our lives ever. Because it's super scary.
So when do you recommend a deadhead setup? Because a lot of factory applications don't they come deadhead setup?
I don't care. That's that they if they've done it that way, they've done it because they can save money doing it that way.
Packaging.
Yeah. The OEMs, unless it's a performance, look, I don't even know. Maybe a factory GTR has that, and that's fine. Somebody's engineered that to work correctly.
Okay.
But most of the stuff that comes from an OEM is done on either because they have to do it to meet emissions,
right,
or they're doing it because some dick penny pincher that sits in the back room that never comes out and they feed pizzas under the door to says, wow, if we just go to a deadhead system, we can save $12 on every car we build. And since we build millions of cars, this is a way better way to go. Forget all the problems it's going to cause, because all he's concerned with is how do we save money?
Yeah.
Right. So then it's going to be like, here, engineer the right system to do the job. And then, okay, now do it cheaper. Now do it cheaper. Now do it cheaper. Now take some shit off that you actually really need to do it right, because we can make more money. And even if there's going to be cars that we have to fix,
right,
we'll still make more money fixing the ones that fuck up than putting the right shit on to do it correctly.
So now this is just a little theory, because you said air, right? Now, if you have a deadhead setup, it's the regulator is pretty much just feeding the fuel to the rails.
Yep.
And then it's not returning. It's just feeding whatever needs to go to the rails into the engine. So wouldn't that make it cooler, because you're only using the amount of fuel that's in the rail and being used?
No, hang on. You're making a mistake. You're assuming because it just goes on a dead end link to the engine that you're not using the same amount of fuel. But think about what I said about the pump. Now, I'll give you this. For sure, running fuel up into your engine compartment, around the intake manifold, and back to the engine, back to the fuel tank, will put more heat in the system than only letting it go to the engine.
Right.
The fuel that actually goes in the engine, it's going to be every bit as hot.
On the thermal side. I mean more so on the thermal side.
But here's the key. Unless the pump speed is varied in proportion to the demand, you still have the same problem. You're still compressing the fuel to make pressure. Hey, you're not compressing it. Sorry. Now Paul's going to be fucking laughing at me because I said you could compress a liquid. But what I mean is you're going to build heat into the fuel by pressurizing it and puke it right back into the tank through the regulator so that you can have your stovepipe go into the engine and let it heat up on the way to the engine. But that way the pressure is constant from where the pump is, right? And it's just going around in a circle in the tank. So that is going to generate less heat than sending it up to the engine and letting it heat up there and then bringing it back. But it's still going to generate heat. Okay. So you haven't solved the heat problem, because the pump, if it runs at max output, which any pump you hook power and ground to that just takes off and isn't speed regulated, that's what it does. So if it doesn't run the pump in proportion to what the demand is, you're putting excess heat in all the time the pump's running.
Interesting.
And they don't put pump controllers on most cars from the factory. Guess why? Because it costs too much.
Right.
Just hook 12 volts to the pump, let it run all the time, and it's just sort of part of it. But they're also not trying to make 2,500 horsepower and drive on the street.
So if you're trying to make 2,500 horsepower, okay, now this is the next thing. If you're running those numbers, right, a lot of injectors are based off of 43.5 PSI, right? That's the base fuel pressure, we could say. Wouldn't you run at that base fuel pressure and then just increase the size of injectors?
No, because there's not enough injectors on the market to be able to get one for every single application. Okay. So what you do is you get one that covers the maximum flow rate that your engine's going to require. So if you're going to have a 2,000 horsepower engine, you clearly, no matter what fuel you pick, you got to have 2,000 horsepower worth of fuel capacity.
Correct. Yeah.
And that starts at the tank, right? How the pickup works, the pump you use, the lines you use, how many 90-degree bends you put in, how many fucking hardware store fittings you put in that have a 1/4-inch hole in the middle of them, even though they're a number 8 fitting.
Right.
How much shit you buy off of eBay that has junk fucking fittings and restrictions and all that junk in it.
Right.
So you have an efficiency of a fuel supply circuit and return circuit. All of that has to match your power demand, right? And then you have to have injectors with an EFI system. You typically need, because you're always returning, right?
Yeah.
So you need to have enough capacity that you have about 25% of the fuel volume always returning to the tank. So if I have 1,000 horsepower engine. I need to have a 1,250 horsepower capable fuel supply system,
right?
So that I never get to the point where I'm fuel starved, right? And all of those things I talked about in the way cause a problem, which you don't even really usually know about. It's totally obvious, but you don't even really know about it until you get the ID pump controller on the car, and you can see what amount of power it's trying to use to deliver fuel to the engine. And when it's trying to deliver a massive amount of power to run the pump and there's no demand from the engine, it's telling you that your fuel system is a piece of shit with a bunch of 90s and Chinese knockoff Amazon fittings and all of that shit in it. So anyway, getting back to the other part of the equation, the fuel demand that the engine requires has to be matched by every other piece of the system. And then you need injectors that have a little reserve capacity over what you're asking for, because you don't want to run those wide open.
Right.
But there's not enough injectors on the market to fit every single one of those applications. So you oversize the injector. You have two choices. You either undersize the injector and then overpressure the injector. Right. To get because if you increase the pressure on the injector, you get an increase in flow rate by the square root of the pressure differential. Right. So you can take an injector that's rated at, something close to what you're going to run and be a little bit over and just raise the fuel pressure. And that fixes the problem for the injector, but it creates a whole new problem for the fuel system, because the fuel system now has to be able to deliver increased pressure. And with increased pressure with anything other than a mechanical pump or an ID controlled pump, increased fuel pressure puts more load on the pump, which drives the pump speed down, which means the volume goes down. So a pump that is not speed controlled, its output is the greatest when it's got zero resistance, and it's the least. And this is obvious, right? You put your finger over the end of it and block it entirely. There's a ton of pressure and zero volume flow because you've got it blocked. So it's just building pressure against your thumb, like at the end of the garden hose, right? And if you turn a hose down enough, you can seal it off completely with your thumb. There's no water flowing. Pull your thumb out of the way. It flows like crazy. Give it no resistance, right? That's how it works. It's really literally that simple. But everybody falls in the trap. And look, this is part of my whole spiel of why I like to use Motec. I mean, there's a number of reasons I like to use it, but one of the main reasons is because no one ever buys Motec because it's the cheapest solution. They usually buy it because they think it's the best solution. Now, whether they're right about that or they're wrong about that, a person with that mentality maintains that same mentality from the front bumper to the rear bumper of their car. They go find the best parts they can find.
It's true.
They go find the best guy there is to put the engine together, the best guy to do the transmission. And when you show up to a project like with someone that's trying to do it the best way they know how, if you see something like, hey, that fuel pump is a fucking piece of shit, we need to use this other one instead, they go, oh, okay, and they just get it, right? So those people are the kind of people that you can be successful with, not because you're using Motec, but because the entire system, just like the fuel system, the entire car is a system. Right, so that entire system, when it works in harmony, you can be successful. Now, it's also, in my opinion, the opposite direction. People who buy the least expensive ECU, they have that same mentality from the front bumper to the rear bumper. And they go buy the cheapest Amazon knockoff Chinese fucking parts to put the car together with. Go find the cheapest motherfucker that'll bolt the engine together, right? And you have, in the end, a pile of shit that I don't know, it doesn't make any difference what fucking engine management system you try to run. You'll never get it to work. It's a never-ending fucking supply of problems. And listen, any race car, that's what a race car is. A race car is literally a series of problems to solve. But when you do this long enough, at least somewhat proficiently, you learn all the traps to fall in. And that's why people go to people with experience that have big names that have been doing it for a long time. Because you don't get to have a big name and be doing anything for a long time if you suck at it, right? And not sucking means you've fallen in every fucking trap you could possibly fall in enough times to know how to teeter around them and not fall in them again. And that's literally my philosophy on life. Because it doesn't matter what genre or what area you're talking about, it's the same. Experience matters.
Okay, so you primarily work with Motec, right?
Yes.
That's all you work with, and clearly you just stated why.
The reason I work with Motec is because in my business, people are mostly looking for me. I've unfortunately made myself the product.
Okay.
And so that's why we can't even get a schedule together, right? Because I'm constantly spinning plates and running everywhere because I'm selling myself. I'm selling my life. So they want me involved with their project because of what I'm able to deliver. And of course, I started at Motec, right? And I have a deep background with Motec and I understand it very well. And also the people that buy Motec and they want the best typically have the money to spend. And then it's a lot easier for me to make money tuning Motec when I tell them, hey, I need $1,500 a day to make this work on the dyno. And they're like, yeah, of course, no problem. Versus, man, are you serious? My ECU costs half that. Why would I pay you 50? Because guess what? I still have to fucking know everything I know now to make your shitbox ECU, which will never work, right? Because all the junk you have around it. And then they don't want to pay. So anyway, but Motec is just the tool. Right. So someone comes to me and says, hey, I want to set a world record doing this. And I say, okay, here's how I think we're going to do it. And if you want me involved with it, I'm going to use this tool that I know I can achieve the result you're looking for if I use this tool. You know, you don't go to Gordon Ramsay, right, and say, Gordon, I want your best steak. And then show up with a bunch of ingredients and say, yeah, you got to cook it on this fucking grill over here. And I want you to use this piece of meat. It's like, get fucked. No, I'm not doing that. I can't, it's a waste of my time and your money. Yeah. You're not going to get the best result out of me making me use a tool, right, that I don't know how to use. You don't go to Jerry Bickle and say, Bickle, I want the best pro mod you can build, but I want you to use this fucking Harbor Freight welder and all this shit from Harbor Freight to build. He's going to say, go, no, get fucked.
Hey, Harbor Freight's not bad though, man.
No, listen, I buy shit from Harbor Freight. Look, it's one thing for me to say this, right, to the industry, and I'm really good at telling everybody else what they should be doing, but I fall in the same trap as everybody else does. I'm a human being. I buy the $600 Chinese knockoff fucking TV screen, put it on the wall, and then it does all kinds of stupid shit. And it's like, yeah, there's a difference. There's a reason why, you know, the Mitsubishi one is $3,500 and the who the fuck knows whatever Chinese brand name one is $350.
Yeah.
Like, at what point in your life have you ever gotten something that costs a tenth of what it should cost that actually does what the thing it's being compared to does, which almost leads itself right back into the whole Motec and compared to every other ECU thing, right? Like, well, we do everything Motec does for less. Like, no, you don't.
But we can both agree that it is one of the best.
It's at the top of the food chain on the pyramid, right, of components, and it's there because it's a bunch of highly motivated people who are focused 97% on quality. I just went to the factory again after like 20 years, and I guess at some point I had just assumed that the stuff was being produced and manufactured somewhere else. No, every single piece that you get that has a Motec label on it is hand assembled at the factory in Australia by like 5 or 6 guys who that's what they do. They build electronics, and every single piece, so they'll get the motherboard from who there is a manufacturer for that, right? But it comes in, it gets tested, then it gets fitted into its case, it gets tested. Every single step of the process that they do, it gets tested. And that's part of why it costs so much, because you have to keep going through all this effort while you're assembling it, checking it, making sure it's right, making sure nothing's wrong with it.
Yeah.
So they can be, and then it gets tested again before it gets shipped out, and then it goes to a dealer, right? And then it goes, but you never, ever, ever. I mean, I've been doing this 24 years.
Yeah.
And I worked at Motec for 5 of those years. 4 anyway. And like, I'm telling you, the number of times we had a dead on arrival Motec anything, I'm not even sure I can remember one. I'm not just blowing smoke. I'm telling you, you never get one that's dead on arrival because it's been checked 100 fucking times before you even see it.
Right.
And that's what you're paying for. You're paying for that level of quality.
That QC.
There are other ECUs. Of course, you can have someone in a fucking sweatshop in China or fucking Brazil or wherever, you know, kids that fucking don't even know what they're assembling. And next week they're going to be digging ditches and they don't give 2 shits about your ECU or running a car. They're just trying to get paid to feed their family.
Right.
Like, you can have that person assembling the stuff you're going to put in your fucking $100,000 race car. Right? Or you can have something by professionals who their job every single day is to produce high quality, right, and 100% functional pieces of equipment.
Right.
Just like the Mitsubishi versus the knockoff XYZ Chinese knockoff TVs that I fall in the exact same trap in my own life. Really good at telling everybody else what to do, not so good at following my own my own logic, right?
So, okay. So now, if you want to work with Shane, right?
Yeah.
What would that look like if you wanted to, or if I wanted you to work on my car? How does that work? Like, what do you ask me questions? Do you have to qualify to work with you? Like,
no. It's a super simple.
And this is just for general people if they want to.
Of course. Yeah. Look, it's just, I get this a lot. I'm not sure why, but people, I feel like they're afraid to contact me or afraid like, oh, I can't get Shane, man. He's he's like too high level or what. I'll work on anything. I don't care what it is. If we've got a Motec on it, if you want to put it on a lawnmower, no problem. You want to build a sprinkler system for your backyard and you want to use Motec, fucking I'm your guy, right? I don't care what it is. And I got that way because when I worked at Motec, I couldn't pick, right? I have a drag racing background, right? But when I got to Motec, I couldn't be like, no, I'm only going to work on drag race cars. I had to work on anything that anybody wanted to have an engine management system on. Whether it was a bike, a car, a plane, a boat, off-road, offshore, drag race, land speed, sports cars, pick a subject, right? Anything. Professional level team, guy doing it in his backyard, sand rail for Glamis, street car, whatever. It didn't matter. I had to do it all. And by that cross-pollination, I learned how to do lots of different things and see things that would happen in one genre of motorsport that I could use to solve a problem in another genre of motorsport that no one had ever thought of because they never had been exposed to this thing, whatever it was.
Right.
So back to what does it take to work with me? It takes getting in contact with me, telling me what your project is, right, and what your goal is, and then I'll tell you the best way we can go about solving that, that problem of getting to your goal. And then I'll tell you how much it's going to cost, so you know up front, and then you can make a decision. And you'll be like, either I want to do that, or wow, that's way more than I thought it would be. But I'm pretty quick. I'm a really bad salesman. I mean, I don't want to waste my time or yours. So normally speaking, when someone cold calls me and says, hey, I want to do this project, what am I looking at? I'll run the numbers in my head for what they want to do when I kind of get what they're supposed to do. Okay. Say it's going to probably be, I don't know, if we're going to put a PDM and a dash and ECU and wiring harness and all the sensors, you're probably going to be at about 40, 45 grand. So do you still want to talk about it, or should we just stop now? Because I don't want to waste my time talking you into all the benefits of Motec, only to have you tell me at the end when I tell you how much it is, go, what, are you crazy? I would never pay that, and hang the fucking phone up. I went through way too many of those calls when I worked at Motec. So I just cut right to the chase. Here's what it's going to cost. Do we keep talking about it or no? Because if I tell you 45, right, and you don't shit your pants and fall back in it, then I know we can continue to have a conversation about it, because you're going to be, that doesn't like blow you out of the water. Right. So that's it. Like I said, I'm a terrible salesman.
So now, on average, what does it cost for you to work on a car or to work with somebody tuning wise? Like
so my daily tuning rate is just $1,500 a day plus expenses, airfare, hotel, rental car, plus the travel expense days, right? So I charge for out of office days. Okay. And that's it. I have a couple of different programs, but it depends on what it is. Like the Bonneville stuff is like a whole week long. So it's I mean, when I worked with Speed Demon, that's George paid that rate, and then I worked only on that car, and so that was just the known deal. Right. But like now, I'm not working with Speed Demon after George passed away, and so I'm working on multiple, like how I was before I worked on Speed Demon. Now I got multiple customers. Well, you're not going to be able to charge those guys $1,500 a day times 3 or 4 of them. Like that's not going to happen. So what you have to do is spread it out a little bit. So Bonneville's a unique case where everyone pays the expenses to get me there. Okay. Right? Because the other thing about Bonneville is, dude, this is not, it's not professional in that it's not a professionally promoted series where people are dedicated to only doing that and they don't do any other job. Okay. It's more of a grassroots sort of racing. Right. It is professionally done as far as the quality, right, and the way they race. But there's almost no one whose job it is to strictly work on a Bonneville car all year long, and that's the only way they make money, right? Okay. So that's not the level of clientele that you can, charge that amount of money for, and they just can't afford to do it. They'll just basically say, well, we're going to go run it ourselves, and then they won't be successful. So you spread the level around a little bit at Bonneville, special case. But I mean, look, it could a little bit be case by case basis. If someone calls me and I'm busy, they're either going to get told you got to wait, but I'll tell them that up front, because I can't stand is someone baiting me. Right? Like, hey, if I'm buying parts from somebody, when am I going to get these parts? I'll have them to you in 3 weeks. Okay, cool. Are you sure? Like, if someone's shipping me parts, that's parts on a shelf, right? Right. But if someone's building something like a wiring harness, a wiring harness for a car with almost any contractor is at least probably going to be a 6-week waiting period. Okay. For anybody that's quality, because they're already in the middle, just like I am. Yeah. They're busy, and they're already, if they're worth a shit, they're not sitting around waiting for a phone call to build a wiring harness. Yeah. They're already building 2 or 3, and they got a couple, right? Yeah. And they'll fit, the soonest I can fit you in is, I'll get you your harness in 6 weeks, because I got to finish the ones I'm doing, get you on the schedule, do the design, build it, and then ship it. Build it, test it, and ship it, hopefully. Yeah. So those kind of guys, it's like, look, am I going to have it in 6 weeks, or is it going to be 12? I don't give a fuck if it's 12. Just tell me it's 12. Just tell me, yeah. And tell me how much it's going to be, and shoot high, right? Because I'm not coming back later to the customer and telling them their harness is twice as much as it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
That's fucking bullshit. I can't stand that. And I never do that. I
Dude,
will
you're
always
hitting it
shoot
right on the
high.
head, man.
I would rather just not do the project. I would rather tell you, listen,
man.
dude, this is going to take 65 grand. You want to do it or not? Yeah, I want to do it. And then we'll lay out the actual number that it's really going to take, right? And I will try to adhere to either that number or I'll inflate it a little bit so that we come in under.
Right.
I never, ever, I cannot fucking stand going back at now listen, if you change directions in the middle, well, then that's a change order, right?
Yeah.
So that, you know this, but same deal. Like, well, we can do that, but man, we just built all this stuff. You're going to, okay. But the way I work is super simple.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to tell you up front what I'm going to do for you.
Okay.
And in return, I expect you to do what you say you're going to do for me. It's a very simple back and forth process.
Thing, yeah.
And that's why, look, dude, I don't do contract stuff anymore. I don't need a contract. Here's my contract. I said I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it. I expect you to do the same thing. And that's it. And I have very few in so let's see, 2006. So I guess I'm at 19 years. Yeah, 19 years. Sorry, I was told there would be no math. 19 years in business, and I've had only a handful of people that have stiffed me. You know,
it happens.
Because you basically qualify the customer right off the bat. Like you just,
right.
And you know, I've had a couple of situations where I get in, I don't read it right, and I get in the middle of it, and I realize this isn't going to work. Right? Not anybody where I think, oh, they're not going to pay me, but I realize that I'm not going to be able to achieve the goal they want to achieve because they're doing something. They're not allowing me the freedom to do whatever I want, and I'll just back out and say, listen, I think I'm not your guy, and I don't want to cause any problems, so I'm just going to give you your money back, and we'll agree to go two different directions, whatever. And I've done that a couple of times, and the couple of times I've done it, that person has recommended someone to me that I ended up actually being successful with because I took that approach.
Right.
And they appreciated it. And they said, you know what, this didn't work out with this guy, but he's a really good guy and he's capable. I recommend, and honestly, look, I don't advertise. Like that's what, like this is the only advertising I do other than word of mouth. And no matter what you do, you cannot fucking spend enough money to build credibility the way you can by a personal recommendation from someone you trust.
That's true.
Hey, where do I go to get this done? You need to call this guy.
Yep.
He's badass at it, and that's it. This is the guy to go to. So now that person is pre-qualified to you by the person you trust who gave you the advice.
That's the best way to do business.
100%.
I think it's better than just advertising because then
depends what you're doing, right?
Right. Depends
when
what
you're selling what I'm doing, which is a service, basically. There's almost nothing. I'm telling you, there is nothing better than a word of mouth.
100%. I take that over any other type of marketing or anything like that. Like that's the best way to do it. Now you mentioned your prices, right? Cool. The reason I asked that is not to be nosy and see how much you're making. It was more so because there's been a lot of, I don't want to say misconceptions, but a lot of people have this thing, and there's things that go around the internet about how much it costs to tune a Motec and how much tuners charge for this.
Sure.
Now, I've heard some crazy prices, which kind of steers people away from even wanting to get a Motec because of the tuning prices.
Right.
But do you feel like these prices equate to the amount of work that you're doing with a Motec?
To be fair, I'm probably on the cheap side of it.
Okay.
In reality, but mostly that's because I don't just tune, right? Almost everything I'm involved with is a big project. So I'm selling hardware. I don't get in the middle of the wiring harness. Just let that happen because I don't want to be in the middle of it. Like, here's the guy, get the wiring harness done by him. I'll feed him what I want. He'll build it. You pay him. I don't want to be in the middle. I'm not going to make any money on it. Right. And I don't try. And that's the other thing. Like when I want to work with a wiring contractor, I go tell him like, look, I'm not trying to make money off you. I'm going to put the customer directly with you. You tell them, and I don't care. Make whatever you want, whatever you think's fair. Just make sure you come in at that number. Yeah. Right. Don't come back with another number and do a good job, and we're good. Okay. Right. And then we don't have any issue because why do I want to be a manager in between the customer and the guy not doing his work?
You probably don't have the time.
I ain't got the time for that shit. Right.
You got the time.
So anyway, look, I think you should charge according to the product you deliver. And if you are delivering a good product with value, someone isn't going to have any problem paying that number. Right. As long as it's got value, it doesn't matter what the number is. But yeah, I do some tuning, right? But here's the other thing. If someone's just calling me with a bunch of shit they got from somebody else And they want me to magically come in and wave my wand because I'm Shane T and it's got a Motec and I can't fix all your fucking problems that you've already created that you want me to solve. So because I can't control that, it depends what it is. If it's a fucking high-end product, like project, I'll just be like, no, I'm not doing that. Because in the first case, I'm selling Motec hardware, right? And when I make the sale and I do the tuning job, I'm making all of the money on the hardware, right? And that allows me to then service you and support you, right? Because I've already made that money. So if you go buy a Motec from this guy because he's your buddy and he fucking sells it to you cheap, and you come to me and you say, I want you to tune it, depending on what it is, I might tell you, well, here's the deal. If you want me to tune it, it's this much a day. And then you're going to pay me what I would have made to sell you that piece of hardware because I'm now going to be tied to it. As soon as I tune it, I'm responsible. So in order for me to support that in the same way, it's not fair. It's not fair for my customer that buys the shit from me, right? That gets my level of knowledge and support. It's not fair to you to shortcut it and fucking, I mean, did you ever go to a restaurant and go buy a steak from the cheap place down the street and go, here, can you make this steak? Like, do you think that's going to fly at Morton's? No. Hey, I brought a steak in from fucking Walmart. Will you make my steak? And I just want to pay for what your part of it.
Yeah.
They're going to go, yeah, get fucked.
Okay. So we got that down, right? Now, one of the things on the technical side, which I don't even know if you really want to, we're not going to say any other ECU brands, right?
I don't care. You say whatever you want. They're all, look, they're all just tools. In the end, they're just tools to do a job, right? And you take somebody that's a super, super tuner in a different brand. Like I've got a buddy, Marco Passante. We were talking about him earlier, Magnus Motorsports, right? And he works on a lot of GTRs. And honestly, Marco will tune anything, right? And I could tune anything. I could tune anything I want, but I can be successful with this one brand that I like to use and almost with certainty guarantee the result. Okay. And so I feel like it's better to be an expert at one than mediocre at many. And so that's why and knock on wood, I've been able to stay busy doing it and gamefully unemployed for 21 years. Oh, no, sorry. Yeah, 19 years. 19. See, once again, I told it, Paul, I'm going to take it in shorts from Paul on this. He's going to be like, stupid motherfucker doesn't know how to add and subtract.
Okay. So with that being said, right, there's other ECUs that kind of try to implement everything to make it easier, all in one kind of situation, right? So let's say Haltech, right? Yep. Now, a lot of people are on Haltech, right? That's probably one of the more common ones nowadays. And Fuel Tech also, right? And they both have this thing where Fuel Tech has everything built into the display, which is a pretty cool feature. Yep. And Haltech has a lot of like a PDM built in, also has a map sensor built in as well, right? So now, one of the things on the Haltech side, which I find interesting, is that you said was Motec kind of separates everything because I guess it's just the good practice to kind of have everything separate, right?
It's a racing based, right? They're not. Motec's target audience isn't street cars. That doesn't mean that they don't build systems that work in street cars, but their target audience is the highest level of motorsport. Okay. And so they're looking for a level of reliability, right? And their philosophy has always been, you do not combine your ignition module, which is likely to fail if the coil fucks up, with your ECU, because then that junks your ECU. You now have to send your ECU in to get the ignition module repaired. Okay. So their ignition modules have always been external, right? And they continue to be. Right. And now the same thing with the PDM. When the PDMs came out, okay, that's your power distribution module. You do not want that possibly prone to failure component as a combination with your ECU, because when it fucks, the ECU fucks at the same time. And now you got to replace the whole thing. And the same thing with a dash. You don't build fucking an ECU inside of a display, because then when the display fucks up, your ECU's junk. Or with the ECU fucks up, your dash is junk. Yeah. So it's just a philosophical difference and a mentality of what's the least possible way to fuck the entire car in a motorsport application. Okay. And that's their focus. They're not focused on how do we do it. They never are focused on how do we do it cheaper, ever.
Okay, so then
they are not trying, and they are not interested in the stereo wars, right? And you know, 211. Like, look, listen, I'm basically like, I like using the shit in a drag racing. I use it in everything. Yeah. But I basically force it up the customer's ass that we're going to use it, because if you want this result and you want me to do it, this is the tool I'm using, whether you like it or not, or whether it's well suited to that type of racing. right? Like they're not interested in getting involved in that fucking race to the bottom that these other guys are in, trying to make a cheaper product and fucking sell it to everybody on the street corner, because they also recognize that to do this properly at a high level, it takes an extremely intelligent person integrating the electronics into the vehicle. Now I sound like I've just patted myself on the back. So let me just say it takes a capable person, right, to integrate. This stuff is not meant to be sold to an end user that does this, on an occasional or one-time basis. It's too complex. There's too many pitfalls to fall in. They know that there needs to be an integrator in between what they produce and the end user. And that's perfectly suited to me, because guess what? If it was so easy, you could just hand it out to everybody and it would work, I wouldn't have a job.
Yeah.
So thankfully they've taken that approach. And that's why, like, I'm loyal. I'm stupid, but I'm loyal. Right? So I could obviously work on any of this other stuff I want to. But everything I've ever achieved professionally since 2001 has been a direct result of my involvement with Motec and the people at Motec and the philosophy of Motec. And I am extremely loyal, not to the brand necessarily, but the people and the mentality. Everything I have in my life, without only a couple of exceptions, my family, right?
Yeah.
And my wife and my daughter, is a direct result of that company and their mentality. And so that's why I'm so loyal to Motec. And we don't have to have an argument about it. Like, there's other systems. Go ahead and use them. I'm not going to use them.
No. I was just curious because you mentioned that on the Mac Daddy vlog, and you were talking about when they were doing the wiring, you were mentioning that.
Oh, the PDM. Yeah, we had to split it up.
PDM, right.
Yeah. Yep.
Which is interesting because it's I've heard this before about like having too many things all in one like that, and if one thing fails, it could cause issues somewhere else. Not talking bad,
probably
but
could be debated.
Oh, 100%,
and both
100%.
people have valid points and arguments, and it's kind of cool that it's all integrated into one. But I'm just saying the Motec way is not that way, and I'm not saying that's the right way. But for motorsport, high-level motorsport, that's why they're focused on that. We don't want something that shouldn't cause a problem with the ECU to cause a problem with the ECU because it failed and the ECU didn't.
Okay.
Or I mean, the ECUs never fail. You have to do something. None of the hardware. The hardware doesn't fail. You have to fucking do something wrong to it to get it to screw up.
When it comes to, this is very specific, right? Kind of, we're not in the general Motec area, but when it comes to sensors, right? I know in a previous interview you had mentioned something about using driveshaft speed for a lot of the drag racing applications, right?
Yep.
Now, you did mention that the reason why you use that is because a lot of the times the front wheels are off the ground and you can't use that as, as reference. So is this something that you should implement into maybe street cars too?
As specifically only useful in drag racing for the reason I mentioned. It's got the front wheels off the ground, and typically traction control is done by measuring the difference between the rear wheel speed and the front wheel speed and controlling that difference to some goal. And like in land speed racing, where we don't have wheelies, we don't need to use a drive shaft sensor. We can. It doesn't matter in that case because they're locked together. There's no diff.
Yeah.
But in the case where you're doing traction control on, say, something like a road race car, if you've got a diff, you've got a difference of wheel speed in versus out.
Right.
You don't see that on the drive shaft because it's the average. Right. So in an application where you're trying to do wheel-based traction control, which isn't in drag racing, again, because you can wheelie. Now, if you're not wheeling in drag racing, no problem. Game on, right? Happy days. You can use the front wheels and use the back wheels, and that works no problem. So in drag racing, firstly, if you could get a wheel speed sensor mounted on the axle housing or read the actual wheel, that would be beneficial. But it's a lot easier to just clamp a collar around the drive shaft where it comes into the pinion on the diff. Right? You can, I've got cars where we read the ring gear. Top fuel cars read the ring gear, so they don't have to have a drive shaft collar. It's the same because it's all hooked together. There's nothing can slip, right?
Right.
And the ring gear's got a shitload of teeth on it. And in a top fuel car, they never change the rear end gear because it's always 320, locked in, mandated by the NHRA in whatever 1997 or 5 or 2, whenever it was. And so it's just sort of common practice in a drag car. And in a drag car, what you do is you draw over time. You start a timer at the beginning of the run with a trans brake release, the clutch comes out, whatever it is. And you use a timer and you draw what the drive shaft curve should be, right? And then you measure what it actually is by looking at the drive shaft sensor. And then you control the power to try and keep it at running that curve over time.
Right.
But the idiotic part of that is you don't actually have a reference for where you are on the racetrack. right? So the time sequence can get out. I mean, I'll give you a really interesting example on something I got exposed to from a friend of mine, Scott Palmer, who runs Top Fuel Dragster. And I met him through Racing Pro Mod because he's got Pro Mods too. And he's just an awesome person all around. But one day I was working for a customer at Gainesville for the Gator Nationals. And it rained really bad. And it was the first time we had run the car. And we were actually here testing it, like leading right up to the race. And we were going to get one qualifying run to run the car. And we didn't think the track was going to be good because it had rained. And we weren't sure we had the car sorted out yet.
Okay.
Because when we were here, it was going all over the racetrack.
Okay.
And we were trying to figure out why. And it had a suspension set up, some steering, something was wrong. And so we thought, you know what? Why don't we just not even try this? Because we don't want to bomb it down there at 180 mile an hour and figure out we didn't solve the problem yet. And you crash it. It's brand new. We're just starting.
Right.
So let's just sit it out. The track's not going to be good anyway. And the track ended up being good and they all hauled ass. And we probably could have, but we didn't want to take the risk. Anyway, this leaves me in Gainesville with nothing to do the next day. And Scott was there. And so he's like, well, you could come over here and help us. And I'm like, okay, you're giving me the opportunity to come and look at data from a Top Fuel car? I'm in, right? I happened to go on the day when the weather, it was super cold that next day. It was like 40 fucking degrees that morning or something. And it wasn't going to warm up for the whole rest of the day. And literally everyone is pulling their hair out in the pit area because what they do is they look at the weather and they decide what the engine build is going to be based on the weather. That's how you tune a Top Fuel car. You tune the engine. It's so backwards. We take the laptop and we tune the air fuel ratio and the timing, and we make that match or adjust it based on the weather, and the engine stays the same.
Right.
And in a Top Fuel car, they have all that opportunity too, but normally what they do, they leave the fuel system alone and barely change it. And they change the supercharger overdrive, and they change the engine's compression ratio to change according to the weather. They leave the fuel the same, and they might do something with the timing to power manage.
Yeah.
But for the most part, that stays the same, and they build the engine and change the boost level to suit that change in barometric pressure and water vapor. Whatever. It's like so foreign and backwards, right? From what I'm used to.
Yeah.
So anyway, so they all have this spreadsheet that they use where they take in all the weather components, and it says, put this head gasket in, and by the way, you have to measure this thing about now you're tuning with parts, right?
Yeah.
So now the combustion chamber volume, because one of them got the valve seat ground a little bit, so the valve sunk in the head and the chamber volume changed on that cylinder. So now you have to basically make the cylinder heads have exactly the same combustion chamber volume on one side and the other. If the block's been decked on one side, you have to know that so you can put more head gasket thickness in it. Otherwise, you're changing the compression ratio on that side, right?
Right.
So now the parts and their dimensions become extremely critical because that's your tuning device.
Right.
Right? So they have like fucking 10 sets of heads. Every one of them's marked combustion chamber volume. So you need to enter the chamber volume and enter the weather data, and it tells you what head gasket to put on that side of the motor. And then they're matched, right? Because if the engine's not the same, it's insane.
Right.
And like the rod stretch. So the rod stretched or compression in the rod, as you run a rod in a Top Fuel car, it gets shorter, right? Just from compressive force. So they don't get many runs at them because eventually they'll fail. But they have to measure the dimension, the pin dimension, pin to the big end dimension in a fixture, okay, to get the dimension of what that is to enter into the compression ratio calculator so they can work out whether or not they've got the compression right down the left side or the right side.
What?
And to this level, I mean, like the guy, I'm friends with a guy that is one of the higher end crew chiefs, and he worked for Kalita, and he's like, yeah, we figured out that we have to wear like cotton gloves, and we put all the fucking connecting rods in a metrology center, a place with measuring devices inside the shop that's air conditioned to a specific temperature all the time. And we figured out that we need to measure these things in that room at that temperature and not touch them with your hands because they're checking things to the 10,000ths of an inch.
Yeah.
And just the temperature in the building, if it varies, the aluminum grows if it's warm and shrinks if it's cold.
Right. Yep.
Right. So if you're trying to go to the 10,000th to make sure you've got the compression ratio accurate,
that matters.
It matters.
Yeah.
Imagine this. It's like it's mind blowing. It's fucking way harder than tuning an EFI system. Here's the problem with the timer. So everything that happens in a Top Fuel car is timer based, right? Other than the fuel pump, which is hooked to the engine and delivers fuel based on the engine speed.
Yeah.
There is nothing that senses what's going on with the load of the engine. Doesn't have any idea how much boost it is. All it knows is RPM. Okay. So nothing is controlling based on the operating condition that the engine's under. What they do is they use a timer that starts when the throttle goes wide open when they leave the starting line. And the timer controls both the clutch application, which is their power management, right? And it controls a timing curve that's over time, and it controls the fuel volume that goes into the engine. Okay, it's got the fuel pump connected to the crank, so it's going to deliver volume. The higher you rev it, the more volume you're going to get. So you have to cut that off and match. You understand how EFI is, right? With a volumetric efficiency curve, right? The VE curve is meant to match the amount of mass airflow that the engine consumes. Sorry, it's actually the air density that the engine consumes on a per cycle basis. Match it with an amount of fuel. That's why you have that shape, right?
Right.
Top fuel car doesn't have a shape. Its shape goes straight up with engine speed. So you have to get that shape by trimming the fuel back and returning some back to the tank, right? But to get that shape to match, you would have to run the engine through the same, our shapes are based on engine RPM and load.
Yeah.
Their shape is based on RPM and time. Time from when we hit the throttle. So here's the problem. If the sequence is out, now keep in mind think about what the engine RPM is going to do as it goes down the racetrack. It's going to go up, then the clutch is going to come in and the RPM is going to come down.
Yeah.
And then it's going to go 1-to-1, and then it'll climb up the drive shaft. The engine and the drive shaft will be 1-to-1 as it goes to the finish line. But imagine if the grip is different on the racetrack. So the tires slip. So the point in time where the engine is at the operating point that it's at may not be the same one run versus the next, because you're using a timer. Imagine how hard it would be by time to accurately fuel the engine based on its volumetric flow rate. Try and use a timer. You get out of sequence. So something very, very simple.
That's crazy.
The brake pressure that they use to hold the car on the starting line, because the car on the starting line, the clutch is out. You're off the throttle. You stage the car with the handbrake. If you pull too much brake pressure, this is an 11,000 horsepower engine. Can you imagine? You pull too much brake pressure. Because there's too much brake pressure and the clutch is centrifugal in a top fuel car, you hit the throttle and the engine jumps up to like 8,000 RPM. The time that it takes to climb to 8,000 RPM is based on the resistance from the car and the clutch and the tire,
right,
and the brake pressure. So if the brake pressure is too high, the sequence gets out right from the get-go. Right? It doesn't move to the right place in the same amount of time. And so now your fuel curve is off compared to what the engine's doing. And something as simple as brake pressure, I wouldn't have believed it, but I saw it. They let me see it.
That makes sense though, yeah.
So
everything matters with
right.
that. Yeah.
So the drag race thing, they use a timer because it's simple and the front wheels are in there. A far better solution is something like an inertial navigation system or an IMU or a IMU with a GNSS, so it looks at the satellites and it knows where its position is on Earth based on that, and then uses inertial measurement, roll, pitch, and yaw, and accelerometers to figure out where it's gone from any given starting point. But the problem with that is, to be absolutely accurate and not include a bunch of other errors, it takes a very high level of precision. Otherwise, you're basically just using bad data. Right? So you can get close, but not dead nuts.
Right.
So there's only one currently on the market, which is a weapons grade GNS INS unit with an IMU from a company called Obsidian. And it's about $5,500. That will then give you the speed, the accurate speed and position to do wheel-based traction control like on a sports car, whether the front end's in the air or not, because it'll generate the correct speed signal. Any other way of trying to do it is basically guessing.
So a lot of gray area still with that.
Well, it comes down to what your level of acceptability is, right?
Yeah.
What error are you willing to accept? And listen, that's not to say that it's impossible to do it any other way. And honestly, the problem is, for that amount of money, will the car actually have a elapsed time improvement by using that device versus the timer? Because you can get pretty damn close and really consistent with a timer. So that's why it's hard to say we have to use this device. But I do have one customer who is getting ready to implement it in their car, because I'm like, look, if you want to go to the moon, we have to have a rocket.
So what about street cars that are making big power? Like a lot of these GTRs are making 2,000 horsepower. A lot of them are running Motec. So they're able to use the traction control of a Motec, kind of get them down the street.
So anything that doesn't accelerate fast, a GPS works perfect for. Like all my Bonneville cars, they have 10 hertz
that
GPS.
Doesn't accelerate fast?
Yeah, so if you're accelerating at less than about 1G,
okay,
a 10 hertz GPS is fast enough to give you accurate ground speed and position.
Okay.
Once you get over about 1.25, 1.5, you start having a positional problem where you're moving so quickly that the GPS can't accurately at 10 times a second tell you where you are. By the time it figures it out, you're already in a new place. So there's an error.
Okay.
But as long as you're going slow, they can be very accurate, very useful. All of my Bonneville cars use GPS for ground speed reference.
Okay.
They still have front wheel speed and rear wheel speed, and I might even choose to control off front wheel speed and rear wheel speed.
Right.
But all the cars I work with now, because I've got enough experience to know the GPS is accurate enough, I just don't even run a front wheel speed unless we have to. I just use GPS for ground speed reference. Okay. Reference that to the rear tires. And you could do the same thing in a road race car or a street car, anything that's not quickly moving from a standing start or accelerating quickly. Right. So it moves to a new position before the GPS can recognize it. It's fine to use GPS. So like in an all-wheel drive car, sports car, anything, just use GPS as the ground speed reference. And you can then, at that point, if the front and rears are locked together, you can measure any front or rear. Okay. Or if you need to drive one different than the other, you have to measure the front and the rear to determine the slip rate of the front versus the rear. So you can do split control or whatever you're doing. If you've got diff controller or whatever it is.
That's with the Motec though, right?
Well, that would be with any device, but
so you can use GPS on other platforms too with ECUs?
I to be honest, I don't know. I don't research other. I can only imagine. I can only imagine. Yeah. But yes, specifically with a Motec, 100% you can use GPS as a ground speed reference. In fact, it's native in the newer M1 series ECU and its general purpose firmwares. It goes through a sequence check and it looks at the movement of the vehicle, which you define based on engine RPM and throttle position. Okay. In other words, it's like, hey, how do I know when you're starting to make the car move? Now, listen, if it's in neutral, it doesn't know.
Right.
But it makes the assumption that if it's moving above this throttle and RPM, and it sees a rear wheel speed input, it's looking for a front wheel speed input to compare to.
Right.
And if it can't find that, then it'll fall back and look for GPS. And if it can't find GPS, then it'll fall back and use the rear wheel speed as the front wheel speed.
Okay.
Which is no good for doing traction control because you're comparing to the thing that's generating the signal.
Yeah.
But what's really good about it is you at least still get a vehicle speed reference point instead of having nothing because the sensor didn't work.
Right.
What you're trying to compare is the vehicle speed, over ground, to whatever the driven wheels are. So when you have all four wheels driving, when you don't have the front wheels driving, as long as they're on the ground, you've got a reference. But as soon as you pick them off the ground, or they're driving now which one, you can't use front versus rear now because they're all driving.
Right.
So you have to have a reference for because the concept is, what is the rate of difference between where the tire is on the ground and where the actual ground is, right? And we want the rear tires to slip X amount, or the accelerating tires need to have slip angle to create grip. And so you have to be able to control to that slip angle, right? So and without a proper reference to what the actual speed of the vehicle is, you can't work out what the slip angle is.
Yeah.
But once you have that reference, it's very simple to then say, okay, what's the slip angle that provides the highest G? And you just aim for that slip angle and try and maintain it. In a drag race car or land speed car, you at some point down the racetrack, almost without fail, with the exception maybe of Top Fuel and Funny Car, you don't have enough horsepower to continue slipping to the optimum acceleration angle or slip angle the tire requires. At some point, you run out of horsepower to keep it at that angle, and your acceleration drops off. Right? So a turbo car, Pro Mod, especially if you're running to the eighth, is close, but by 2.25 or probably 2.25, depending on the track conditions, you're all in. And whatever it does at that point is whatever it does. You can't generate enough power to keep the tire at its maximum acceleration. It's basically just slowing down. I mean, it's not. It's speeding up. But when you're looking at it from an acceleration standpoint, the acceleration's falling, not going up.
All right, so let's talk about some four-cylinder action, right? You got this SR20 that you were working on. It was for years, pretty big deal. This SR20 that was making over 2,000 horsepower.
Yep.
And I'm pretty sure at some point it held the record too, right?
Yes.
For it had four-cylinder.
Yeah. Well, for sure it had the record there, but it actually was the quickest and fastest four-cylinder drag car at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was Mazworks.
Correct. Yeah, that was Mazworks Team Techno Toys, the S15. It was a SR20, Mazworks SR20 billet block, and I always lose track of the alphabet soup that is the cylinder heads, but I don't remember which cylinder head it is, but it's a factory casting, and it's 2.2 liter.
Yep.
We ran a single 88 millimeter turbo and obviously watered air intercooler and methanol, and it made, when we started with the original turbo, it made 1,800 on the engine dyno. Jeez. And we went from 670s to about 640s with that setup. And then went back to the dyno to try the compound version. right? We tied it together with a test session for a new different brand of turbo, right? A Precision. So we were going to go to the dyno with the Precision and compare, like we were trying to pick which turbo we wanted. So we had the one we had, we got a new version from them, and then we got a Precision to try, and like, we're going to try this. And then at the same time, the compound thing had started. So it was like, then we're going to use that same engine on the dyno, put all this compound turbo shit on top of it and see if that's viable.
Right.
So we did it down here in Florida on the dyno, and the engine made 1,800 horsepower with the old turbo. It made on the dyno, I think, like 62 pounds of boost. Now, it has a snorkel going out of the front of the turbo to the body of the car. It makes more boost down the racetrack because it gets ram air, right? And because we're all in on the turbo, we're not controlling to a specific boost level. The boost goes up when the air pressure goes up on the inlet side of the compressor. So we gain more boost down the back. The faster we go, the more boost we make. On the dyno, you don't have that up. You're all in with the turbo, and it makes what it makes based on what it can draw in. It doesn't have any ram air to work with.
Right.
So it made, like, I want to say 62 or something like that pounds of boost on the dyno, and it made 1,800 horsepower. We went back, tried the other turbo that was from that same company, and it was like, I was slightly better, 64 pounds. It made a little bit more power.
Okay. Then
we put the Precision on, made a dyno pull, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. It made 83 pounds of boost, and it made 2,010 horsepower. And it was like, yeah, that's the turbo we're going to use, right? Yeah. So then at that point, we were able to run the car up to the point where we crashed it. I think we went 622 at 220. Jeez. I think it was 226 on that pass, but we later ran one at 229.
Yeah.
So those were our aggregate best numbers, ET and speed. And at that moment in time, it was the quickest and fastest four-cylinder anywhere in the world.
Okay. Now, have you ever worked with any other four cylinders other than the SR20?
Yeah, sure. Actually, so I'm involved with a project right now with a racer named Jason Ostrom. He's got an all-wheel drive Honda Civic with a B series engine in it, and so I think that one is 2-liter. Maybe it's 2.2 also, but it's just similar package.
Right.
And but the difference is that the class that he runs in, you're limited to an 83 millimeter turbo.
Okay.
So that engine is only making about 1,800 horsepower at the wheels.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now, what did you notice between the SR20 and the B series in terms of how those cars how they make power between the two?
There's a lot of brand specific like banter that goes back and forth, but I mean, in reality, there's nowhere in the ECU where I enter, this is a Nissan, this is a Toyota, this is a Chevy, this is a Honda. It doesn't know. It literally goes back to the discussion we started with about air density and mass flow. You know, given any engine, if it's physically capable of containing whatever the power adding device is, normally a turbo, if it's able to, the power is generated by the turbo, right? Not the fucking engine. Because you take the turbo off, the engine makes no horsepower. Right. Right? Because it can only breathe what it can get from the atmosphere. So the turbo is what determines the power level.
Okay.
Almost period. And if the engine is capable of containing what the turbo can deliver, a Honda or a Nissan of equal displacement and RPM capacity are going to make the exact same horsepower. It doesn't know. The air doesn't know. It doesn't know it's in a Nissan. It doesn't know it's in a Honda. It doesn't know it's in a 2J. It doesn't know it's in an RB. It doesn't know the difference.
Now, the only difference could be the amount of boost you're running, right? Because that could be based on...
No, if the displacement and the camshaft dynamics and the ports are the same...
Okay.
I mean, imagine we just build two engines. I mean, but one just has a different brand. If everything else is the same, they're going to make the exact same horsepower.
So head flow doesn't...
No, head flow matters. What I'm saying is if you match all that shit between the two engines, then you can't come up with a different result, right? It'd be like building two of the same engines.
Right.
So between the two engines, what's different is the Nissan port, and this is almost across the board with Nissan. They seem to do more effort in airflow and porting and port angle than, say, Toyota does for the 2J, right? And the B-Series Honda is kind of the same. Like, it's not as good a port as the Nissan is, but it's damn close. The 2J is a terrible port. It's like a fucking tractor. It comes in and makes a 90-degree turn. The ones on the end come in on an angle. It does all this weird shit.
Yeah.
But the platform is good and robust and bulletproof. And the RB, I've not done a lot of RB in the past. I've done a few.
Yeah.
Right? And then I've done the recent ones. The RB has by looks of it anyways, and probably a flow bench number, a better cylinder head. But in the end, the power adder is really the turbo. So what happens if the engine's more efficient at moving air in and out of itself is it will move the same mass airflow right? But it'll do it at a more efficiently.
Right.
So the boost pressure that it requires to move that mass airflow through less, it's almost like the fuel pump thing. If you have less restriction, right, more goes in at less pressure, then you can make the same horsepower. But in the end, it's just how hard does your compressing device have to work? So if it has to work harder on a 2J, in other words, it makes more boost because it can't get the air into the cylinder,
right,
then by building pressure, you're going to build heat, right? And by building heat, you're going to have obviously less efficiency because the higher the pressure is, the less the efficiency is.
Right.
The hotter the air is, the more you have to work at getting the heat back out of it.
And the less dense it is also, right?
The less dense it is.
Right.
But like in a drag race application where you have a liquid to air heat exchanger, as long as you get the air cooled back off to the same temperature, it doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah.
You're losing on the efficiency of the turbo, which means if it takes more pressure to get to the same mass airflow rate on the intake side, it has to be driven by the exhaust side. So that means the RPM of the turbo has to go up. And to get the RPM up, you have to put more exhaust through, and it won't go through, so the back pressure is higher, right? So then you have a mismatch on the back pressure and the boost. So yes, it's an efficiency thing. And I'm talking about all-in engines. Because engines where you run 30 pounds of boost or some low boost like that, if you look at almost any compressor map, that's going to be, as long as the turbo's sized properly, you're going to be sitting almost dead in the center of its efficiency island, where it takes the least amount of horsepower to make that pressure at that mass airflow and generates the least amount of heat it can possibly generate. So it's super efficient. Now you don't need a water-to-air intercooler. Right? You can get away with an air-to-air intercooler because you can get the temperature down because it's not so fucking hot to begin with. Right? Or you can get away with running it on gasoline. You don't need to run methanol because you don't need the charge cooling effect that methanol offers to get it to live because you don't have enough intercooler because of compressor. I mean, it's the balance of everything. Everything's related to everything in the whole entire car. But all-in engines are easier because you're not trying to sit in that. You're running off the end of the map somewhere that if you tell the manufacturer what you're doing, you never want to tell your manufacturer what turbo speed you're running. Right. And if they tell you, oh, don't run over, it's like, so my friend Robert from Force Performance, they helped me out on a project.
Robert.
Yeah, Robert Young.
Oh, he was on the podcast.
Oh, was he?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Robert's awesome. I love Robert. He's
great.
So cool. But the thing is that Robert, like the level that I'm at, the level of projects that I work on, that's not his normal person that he sells turbos to. So, but whenever I have it, like Robert's the reason why there is a compound turbo Celica, because I went to Robert and said, Robert, am I out of my mind? I need a turbo that's big enough to move 3,000 horsepower at like 2-to-1 pressure ratio, which doesn't seem to exist. Yeah. And if it is, it's something so big you never want to put it on a race car because it weighs 300 pounds.
Right.
So why can't I just take two somethings that have half the mass flow that I need at 2-to-1 and use both of them to feed a third one, right? The compound part of it wasn't the question. It was just, can we get away with two 88s? Because that then sets two compressors in the middle of their happy, efficient spot at 2-to-1,
right,
or 2.5-to-1, and gives us the mass flow. Because one's only good for like 150 pounds an hour. 150 pounds a minute. But two is good for 300 pounds per minute, which should be enough mass flow to generate 3,000 horsepower, which is what I'm trying to do, right? So can I just use 288s? And he's like, oh no, I don't think. He goes, let me think about it. He calls me back the next day. He's like, you know what? So first of all, the answer is yes, of course. Two 150s is the same as a 300. But he was going through would we act? Because I was literally like, I'm just going to go buy two more Pro Mod 88s and hang them in front of this Pro Mod 88. And so he's like, I think yes, in general, but it would be better if I could build you exactly. You need a little bit smaller compressor and you need a lot smaller turbine housing because you're splitting the exhaust through two turbos and you'll struggle to get the turbos to run the right speed, splitting it off between the two. So how about I build you a custom turbo that's, I think it's 84 or something like that.
Yeah.
Two 84s with a small exhaust side so they spin easy because you have to spool this on the starting line before you go.
Right.
So anyway, that's how that worked. So I worked on this project where we had this dinky little bitty engine. It was a 670cc 600 basically size Suzuki engine in this little sports car.
Okay.
It's called a D Sports Racer in SCCA. And I had this insane owner that wanted to he had all the money in the world, literally. And he's like, look, I want to go do this. I want to go under 2 minutes a lap at Road America. And so he took his IMSA team and said, we're going to build this little D Sports Racer and go do this at the runoffs this year. And I don't care what it costs. I want to go less than 2 minutes a lap and I want to win the race.
Yeah.
And so it was literally an F1 style, seriously insane amount of money to be able to build all this custom shit to do this. And they built 2 cars. So when they brought me on, the rules said you could use normally aspirated engine or you could use a turbo. Normally aspirated 1000cc, easy GSXR engine, whatever, and or 670cc turbo, which I think they picked that number because they figured no one's crazy enough to build. There isn't one. You can't go buy it, right? Who the hell's going to build a 670? Okay. It's like hold my beer, right? So when they bring me on, they say, look, here's the deal. We're building this turbo project and we want to know if you want to be involved with it, whatever. Yeah, of course. So I go out there. I'm like, okay, what are the rules? It has to be a 670. All right, what's the turbo rule? There's no turbo rule. Well, what fuel do we have to use? You have to be able to buy it at the track. That's it.
Right.
So the tracks was supplied with Sunoco, I think, and they have 118 octane gasoline. It's like C16. It's like, okay, well, we use that gas and there's no turbo rule. So they're like, yeah, here's the deal. The normally aspirated engines, we went and bought one from every manufacturer that makes one for this race series. Brought them all here, put them on the dyno. We ran every one of them so we know what they make. The best ones make 225. Do you think we can make 225 with this turbo motor? And I'm like, I don't want to say because I don't want to shoot myself in the foot, but I'm like, I don't know. We'll see. But in my mind, I'm thinking 200 with it. Like the thing makes 100 on its own. It'll make 200 at 15 pounds of boost. But I don't want to, again, I don't know. And the only turbo, they had the turbo already. And the only turbo they could get was the one that, going by the compressor map on the Garrett website, said it was some tiny little thing like a GT24 or 20, I don't know, alphabet soup once again. It was the right compressor map for what they were trying to do. But I looked at it and I'm like, that is not big enough to do shit. But whatever, it's what you have, so let's just try it. So we ran that thing the first time with the wrong turbo on it on the dyno. It made 289. We needed to make 220. We made 289 with the wrong turbo. So then I got involved with Robert at Force Performance. Robert, here's what we're trying to do. And I'm trying to make, well, we can make however much we can possibly make, but here's the engine we have, right? And we need a balanced compressor and exhaust side based on what we're trying to achieve. Yeah, no problem. So he gave us 3 different turbos that were his, like, here's what I think, trial 3 of these and see how they work, and we'll see what happens. So we ran all 3. Okay, so it made 375 with the best turbo. And then we went, yeah, that's good. What's your next guess? Okay, try this one, and this one. And in the end, it made 425 horsepower. And the engineers that were working on the 2 cars and the race engineer said, stop with the normally aspirated project. We're going with the turbo. Okay, and then they did simulations up at Multimatic, because Multimatic actually built the car up in Canada. They have an F1 simulator. So they put the driver on the F1 simulator and simulated the car that we were building and ran around Road America and figured out that they only would need about 320 horsepower to be able to achieve our goal of less than 2 minutes a lap. So then we went back to Robert and said, Robert, okay, we made all this power, but in the end, we only need to make 325. So we could turn the boost down so the compressor gets more efficient, right? When you go back down on pressure, the compressor efficiency goes up. Because the compressor efficiency goes up, the exhaust pressure drops. Now the pressure ratio across the engine gets more favorable with more boost, less back pressure, right? So the volumetric efficiency of the engine goes up. The temperature increase goes down because you're compressing less. Now you need less area for intercooler, right? And then that means there's more room for radiator, and that means you're dragging less shit through the air. So now you're refining, and we only need to make 325 horsepower. And then with Robert, it was like, here's where we're at. And, you know, I had turbo speed and pressures in and out and everything. So he had basically all the data he needed to be able to go, right, here's where you're at and here's where you want to be. You need this compressor, right? And then he did a up and a down on that. And then we ran that at 325 horsepower. And then we did another one, a series of 3 on the exhaust side. And then whatever the best combo was is what we ended up building and using to race. And we ended up, in the end, we did go less, minute 55, and we won the race by like 45 seconds. But it was literally, we're racing against SCCA club level racers, where it's like a guy and his wife. Yeah. And then we're a crew of 20, all wearing headsets, all dressed the same, put the car up on fucking air jacks on the grid, put tire warmers on it, right? And then drop it on the ground and go to the grid position and take off in the race. We were ahead by like 20 seconds at turn 1. That car would go 178, I believe, down the front straight at Road America. Probably one of the favorite projects that I ever got to work on.
It sounds fun. A lot of the stuff like that is fun.
That was, everybody on that team was extremely high level. I mean, dude, it had inverter shocks on it. It had F1 shocks from Red Bull on it. I mean, it was like insane high level. And it was a super team from the standpoint that everybody believed and had respect for everybody else, to the point where we were all moving in the same direction. There was no friction.
Yeah.
Right. So if it was really quick to come up with a decision. There was an expert for everything. So if you just believed in the expert, you asked them, what do we need for this? You need this. Okay, bang, you put it on. Yep, it works. It was magic. By far, I would say probably my favorite team that I've ever been involved with.
And especially with Robert, shout out to Robert, man. Super informative. I love Robert, man. He's such a good dude.
Yep.
Super informative.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. This is probably a stupid question, but
Blunt.
Do you need to run a blow-off valve?
Well, it depends what you're doing, and it depends what your willingness is to buy turbos is, right?
Okay.
So if it's a pro mod and it's a precision turbo, do you need to run a blow-off valve? No, you don't really need to. You can get away with not running one up to a point. When you rev the turbo up high enough and don't have a blow-off valve, you will break the turbo by closing the throttle behind it and trying to make it make, a 20-to-1 pressure ratio. It just unscrews the turbo, right? It breaks itself because it's like sticking a screwdriver in it would break it. It just destroys itself. So I know from experience on a big turbo, when you're all in, like on a 2J or an RB car, if you don't have a blow-off valve, you will for sure break the turbo at the other end of the racetrack when you close the throttle.
Okay.
Don't ask me how I know. But so there's various reasons why you want to run a blow-off valve.
Okay.
For instance, on the Pikes Peak car, there's a lot of transient throttle action going on, or any road race car, or even a street car. There's lots of times where the throttle isn't just pinned wide open or completely closed.
Right.
You're going in between. And so running a blow-off valve allows the turbo to maintain its RPM as you start to go closed throttle, because it leaks the boost pressure off that's trying to stop the compressor.
Right.
Remember, if you turned the turbo and screwed all this air into the intake manifold and you don't keep turning the turbo, then the air leaks backwards out through the turbo and you just lost it. Right. But the blow-off valve allows it to leak out to atmosphere without going backwards. So it then doesn't try to stop the compressor, which means the turbo RPM will stay up. Which means when you go back after the throttle, it doesn't have to rev so far back up to get to boost.
Right.
Because if you only drop it halfway, then you only have to climb back up halfway. So that's one reason. The other reason is on all of those cases where you're running, something that's something that has to run for a long period of time, you can almost without fail now, any turbocharger you get will generate way more fucking horsepower than you can cool off.
Yeah.
Right. So your trouble isn't how to generate power; it's how to thermally manage the heat that you're going to generate by doing it.
Right.
So if you use a blow-off valve and let that hot air leak out before it gets to the intercooler that you're not going to use because the throttle's closed, right? Then you don't heat your intercooler up so much. And if you don't heat your intercooler up, then your air density is higher going into the intake manifold when you go back after the throttle, right? And the charge isn't as hot, right? So it doesn't want to knock, right? So there's a lot of reasons to run a blow-off valve that are maybe not so completely. It's not just so it goes when you let off the throttle so you can be cool like back in the day. But it's really about managing what's going on with the whole car thermally and as far as the compressor efficiency goes and all these things. Now, in the case of a pro mod, the turbos are sized in such a way that you can get away with not running a wastegate on the exhaust side, because the total mass flow that it can generate when it's all in happens to match the capacity that the turbocharger or turbine side of the turbo can deliver to the atmosphere. So you want all of it you can get anyway if you're going to close the wastegate. If you match the turbo to that total mass flow, then it doesn't matter if you have a wastegate. The back pressure will be what the back pressure is, and that's it, right? And it won't be super high as long as the exhaust side is a match for the compressor side and the engine. So on a pro mod, it's easier to manage the boost pressure going to the engine by revving the turbo all the way up and just leaking the pressure off that's going to the engine to control what the engine consumes, right? You're all in on the exhaust side, and it's way faster when you're ready for all the power. You can literally switch it back to all power by closing the blow-off valve, or whatever you're using as a blow-off valve. Could be a drive-by-wire throttle or something like that. Right. And I mean a throttle that leaks to atmosphere, not the actual throttle.
Right.
So it's way faster. It's also far more precise because you don't have the lag of the turbo revving up to get back to full boost again. It's already revved up and it's sitting there. You're just letting it leak so you get the boost number you want. And then you close it and bang, it's straight back up to the power you want to make. Now, that's a super inefficient way to do the job because the compressor is making all this fucking heat and you're wasting it and giving it away and letting it blow off the blow-off valve. but you're drag racing. So who gives a shit if it's inefficient?
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
You only needs to work for 3 seconds or 4 seconds or 5 seconds or 10 seconds or whatever it is. So you can get away with a lot different things depending on the application of what you're doing.
It's safe to say then in that case, it depends on what you're doing for one, and then two, compressor surge is bad then, right?
Yeah, well, so listen, that's the other reason to use it. When you have a compressor that's big enough to make 5,000 horsepower on a Pro Mod, and you try to spool it up when the engine's only at 4,000 and make 20 pounds of boost with it, the turbo is way off to the left, or you're way off the left of the compressor map, or you're at least riding the left side line. So it's wanting to surge. One way you can force it not to surge is simply move the mass flow at that pressure further to the right so it goes into the center of the map where it's efficient, won't surge, off the surge line. So how do you do that? You need to be able to move more air at the same RPM, but the engine is setting how much air it will consume at that RPM based on the cylinder head, camshaft, intake manifold, exhaust manifold, all the shit, right? So you can't make the engine swallow more unless you raise the RPM. So that's one way. Except when you raise the RPM, guess what? It hits the tire harder, so that's going to unload the chassis. Or the other option is you just give it a leak to atmosphere. Right? Literally just let the air leak to atmosphere through a leak. I mean, they used to, in the old days, like the GM team back in the old Sport Compact days, they had like 4 AN caps on the side of the plenum on the intake. Oh, no, actually it was on the boost tube between the intercooler and the intake manifold. And they would fucking literally unscrew a number 8 cap or a number 10 cap or a number 6 cap. The other ones would be capped. And they just let that leak all the time to atmosphere because that would allow them to run a turbo that was too big on an engine too small and not surge. And by running the big turbo on the little engine, letting it leak and moving the mass flow out to the middle of the map, they could go higher up the map and make more boost.
Efficiently.
Yeah. Speed Demon, perfect example. Speed Demon is a special case race car that Speed Demon 2 now. I'm talking about the gold car, not this newest one they just stacked up. The Speed Demon uses the same chassis and driveline components and turbochargers, 88 millimeter turbochargers, because out there the category is streamliner, blown fuel streamliner. So they all run methanol, they all turbo. So they're blown fuel streamliner, but the engine size determines the class. So there's AA, that's bigger than 500 inches, and then there's A, that might be 450 to 500, and then there's B, and it's like 400 to 450. It's a different breakdown, but generally that's how it is. So the further down the alphabet you go on the engine size, the smaller the engine gets. So they run 4 different engine classes, and they have the record in AA, A, B, C, D, and F, and not E. Right? So AA is the 555, I think it is now. And then we had a 447 that was an A. That was an LS. So the 555 is a big block Chevy.
Okay.
And then we had a 444, I think, LS. And then there was a 390-inch actual traditional small block and a 370-inch actual small block and a 320-inch actual small block. And they turned that engine, there was a 300-inch small block, and they turned that into a 256 to go for the E record. So it's 256 cubic inch, right?
Okay. Running
the same turbos that a 555 is trying to use. So on the one hand, the 555 is upside down and backwards because it's a massive engine compared to a small turbo.
It's
like I got a fucking streetcar turbo on it.
Right.
But still, because it's big, it makes 3,500 horsepower. And the A engine is a really good match, and it also makes 3,000 horsepower, but it does it at a more efficient point in the operating range of the turbo, so it'll rev up higher, right? So that's actually a better package than the big engine small turbo was, even though it made more power. And then we've got this dinky little 256. So the problem with the 256 is, and the 256 make 3,000 horsepower, like no problem, right? Because it just makes 3,000 at 70 pounds of boost or 60 pounds of boost.
Right.
So we're running the car at Bonneville, and the problem we have is when it makes the gear change with that little dinky engine on it, it pulls the revs down enough that the mass flow drops to the left of the surge line on that 88 millimeter compressor. And we get compressor surge. And then as the engine revs up and it struggles its way through that part of the gear, it finally has enough mass flow to move off the surge line, and the turbos start doing their job again because we've mismatched the engine and the turbo, right? Because we want all this power, we can make it 10,000, but when it makes the gear change and yanks the engine out of its happy spot on the turbo, it falls to the left of the surge line and surges.
Yeah.
So we're at Bonneville. How are we going to solve this problem? I'm like, I got an idea. Take the boost reference line off for the wastegates that's coming off the compressor housing on both turbos, and put a T in it and run it to the intake plenum. So we get the pressure reference from the intake manifold, not the compressor outlet. Because obviously it's easier to come off the compressor outlet when you're doing multiple engines because you don't have to hook it to the intake manifold.
Right.
But in this case, move those off of there, unscrew the fittings out of the turbos, and let's go run. Well, what do you mean? I'm like, let it leak. let it leak out of the 2 holes in the compressor housing. That'll stop the surge because there will be enough extra mass flow, and we'll go make a run. So we did, and guess what? It doesn't surge anymore. We just moved the mass flow out to the middle of the compressor map by letting it leak to atmosphere through the 2 fittings in the compressor housing. Now, are we going to be able to make as much overall boost with that leak? Of course we're not going to be able to, but it doesn't matter. We're not running all we can make. Yeah. We're running what we can use. And we had no other choice. Either that or let them surge until it breaks the turbo. The right way would have been get the right turbo match for that size engine, but we're at Bonneville. We didn't have, like, what are you going to do?
Right.
Yeah, I know that's the right way, but we're here at the race and we're not coming for another year. So shall we go home or shall we fucking let it leak to atmosphere? I've already done this. I know it works. I used to do it in Sport Compact.
Random topic, but the Haltech has the map sensor built into the ECU. So there's a vacuum line that's on it. Now, one of the things that I saw on the forums was people were saying that you want to put your map sensor as close to the intake manifold as possible, right? Now, what are the downsides to running the map sensor off the ECU if you have a longer line and it's in the cabin?
So this is like a loaded question because there's like 20 different things topics to talk about regarding that. So once again, go back to the philosophy of Motec. No, we're never building. Now I don't want to say never because they did originally, like in the 80s, and I think they learned their lesson. Don't mount the map sensor in the ECU for 2 reasons. Number 1 reason, if it fails, the fucking ECU has to go back to get fixed.
Right.
And number 2, if you have that map sensor on board and someone wants to run a higher scale than what you've built in, they're fucked. They can't. Unless they have to run it some external input. Okay. So Motec's philosophy, we're never putting the map sensor again on the board. Right. Again, with the screwdriver boxes in the 80, yes, they were built into the ECU. Then after that, they stopped. So there's that. The reference line length should be relatively close to the intake manifold so that you don't have a huge delay. You're trying to fuel the engine based on what you're measuring going on in the intake manifold.
Correct. Yeah.
And what its RPM is, right? Speed, density. If you don't have a reference point that's accurate, then when you change throttles or have transient conditions, you're likely to be erroring by under or over fueling the engine because the operating point isn't being measured at the same time because you got a delay. Right. So it's literally goes right back to the top fuel car. You're out of time. The time sequence is wrong. And the trouble is that the engine is consuming air and fuel at a really high rate. And when it changes and you're fueling it behind, it's a massive error for a while. And it's difficult to get any engine to actually, on any sort of consistent basis, have combustion cycle to cycle that doesn't vary all over the place between complete misfire and pre-ignition and then knock and normal. And I mean, it's just, an engine is almost chaos when you start looking at what's going on cylinder pressure wise and you start comparing one to another.
Yeah.
It's not chaos. It's understandable, but still it's really difficult. So the best case scenario would be sample the pressure in the plenum on the specific cylinder that has currently got the intake valve open and use that reference point as your calculation for the air density going into that cylinder. So in other words, crank synchronous or engine synchronous sample of instantaneous or average from a number of sample points done quickly during the intake process when the valve's open. Say this is what the average pressure is, therefore deliver this amount of fuel to that cylinder.
Okay.
When you're doing it by average out in the center of the plenum, you're always making some kind of mistake. It's just a matter of how big it is. And if you then move the sensor 25 feet down a vacuum hose to measure it, well, the signal will be really smooth, but it's not really going to be timed to what the engine's doing. If it's running full throttle, never has a throttle transient change, and you're sweeping the engine through RPM curve slow enough, it's not going to matter.
Based on this whole conversation that we've had, it depends on what you're doing, right?
100%.
Right. Now, we're not talking about
you can literally stand on the hood of an engine. If you could piss the right amount of liquid into the engine, it'll run the same. It doesn't care.
Yeah.
When it's right, it's right. And it does not matter how you deliver it.
Right.
And that's why in the end, there's not a super huge difference between a perfectly executed EFI engine and a well-executed mechanical injected engine and or a carbureted engine. And in some cases, like in the carburetor case, it's really common to take something like a well-tuned carburetor engine, like a Pro Stock engine, for example, and put EFI on it and lose horsepower because you now move the fuel to a place where it doesn't have as much opportunity to atomize and cool the charge. You change the charge density, so the power goes down.
Right.
So there's what the engine wants, right? And if you give it what it wants, it doesn't matter how you do it. Right. This is why it's so fucking annoying to me. And listen, I'm guilty of it myself, right? Because I promote myself, and I have promoted myself, and I learned that from the twins. They're the ones that actually told me, dude, you need to have a tag. Like, you can't just be Shane Tecklenburg Promote. You need to be some name. You need to come up with something that, like, just maybe Shane T. And I'm not creative enough to have ever come up with anything different. So I just, okay, fuck it, I'll be tuned by Shane T.
Shane T's cool, yeah.
Right? And then Vinny 10 is the first one that actually, because he was right on board with it. And he's like, yep, I'm putting that on my car. I'm going to put that. So then, unfortunately, they came to Pomona. That was like 2004. And they came to Pomona because I went there to help him tune the car. And he's like, I want to put your decal on the car. Send me your decal. I don't have a decal. He's like, well, I'm not putting Motec on. I know you work for Motec.
Yeah.
But you just came here and you spent 2 days helping me fix all kinds of shit not related to the Motec to get this car done. I'm putting your name on the car, not Motec. So come up with a tag name. And the twins are like, tuned by Shane T. Fine. So I said, tuned by Shane T. He made a decal, put it on the car. They brought the car to Pomona, ran it to the World Finals. He went off the end of the racetrack into the sand trap, destroyed the front of the body. But he gave me that piece of the fender that had my I still have it. I still have it. Hangs on the wall at my river house. So I'm guilty of promoting myself because that's what it takes. I mean, the twins were the ones that told me, listen, don't feel bad. It's not bragging, right? Most people pay someone else to do this job and basically promote them.
Yeah.
If you can do it yourself, no one is going to promote you like you're going to be able to promote yourself. It's important. You need to start doing it. So that's when I learned, okay, I'll do it. So of course I've been, showcasing the things that I've been working on and saying like, look, here, this thing made all this power. But in the end, tuners that say, oh, I showed up with a laptop and I made power. You don't make power as a tuner. The engine makes power based on the mass flow of oxygen it can get through its cylinders. And if you fuel it correctly and you spark it at the right time, it will make the same power no matter who is doing the tuning, no matter which engine management system is on it, and indeed, whether you're using mechanical injection, EFI, direct injection, carburation, or standing on the front of the hood, pissing down the hole that it's ingesting air from. The end result will be the same no matter who does it. If you have 10 tuners show up to do, if they're competent, they are all going to arrive at the same horsepower number. So stop, for the love of God, bragging about how much fucking horsepower you can make as a tuner. You do not make the horsepower. The person that designs the engine and puts the hardware together and the power adding device and all of those subsystems, that's what decides what the ultimate maximum capability of the engine is, not the jockey with the fucking keyboard.
Man, okay.
Get over yourself.
Yeah, it's true. But now, the one thing that did come to mind is the tuners who really don't know what they're doing, right?
Well, so the key word there was, I said competent tuners, right? Yeah. So, and what's going to happen is you're going to have someone that maybe is technically competent with zero experience. And if everything goes perfect, then they're going to come up with the same result. Right. But the bottom line is, dude, race cars and racing engines, and these are all series of problems to solve, right? I worked on a car here yesterday that has a problem with a cam trigger, okay? And we can't work out what it is. Thankfully, I'd run 2 of the other engines, right? And we measure, and I'm working with Abe, Rated R, right? Abraham on this project. And so I was in Australia working on the same exact engine for a different car, Mac Daddy, right?
Yeah, trigger problems?
Cam trigger problems.
Cam trigger what?
Cam sensor.
What was wrong with it? No, I know what it is.
Oh.
I'm saying, what was the issue?
Okay, so
can
anyway.
we talk about it or no?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
because that's a common thing with the RBs is there's these companies battling over who has the best crank and cam trigger, all this stuff. And
well, so here's the reason that's the case. In the case of a 2JZ, and this was always our philosophy at Motec, if the factory has a cam and a crank sensor inbuilt, we're going to change the firmware to be able to use that pattern, because the factory obviously spent millions of dollars developing the sensor and trigger wheel combination and pattern. Same thing with the cam sensor, and they've researched it and it's worked out, and it's I don't want to say it's perfect, but it's perfected.
Right.
And so it's a lot better to use that than just hang some random trigger wheel off the front of the crank, in a bracket that bounces all over the place and changes gap and fucking position, and then hang who knows what, maybe read the cam lobe through the valve cover with a Hall effect or some other. Now, you can get away with that, right? But if you're racing at a high level and you want precision, you need something that's going to be foolproof and not be a problem. So we were always, again, a philosophical thing at Motec, we're going to read the factory triggers when available. And when not available, there is a proper way to generate the profile on the tooth of the trigger wheel to suit the sensor that you're using.
Right.
And in very simple terms, if it's a mag sensor, a variable reluctance sensor, the tooth width as it goes across the end of the sensor pickup shouldn't be less than equal to the diameter of the pole piece in the pickup of the sensor, and should not be more than 2 times the width of the pole piece in the sensor to provide a proper signal. I mean, that is like the number one basic rule, right? Then its height profile compared to the gap next to it, right, needs to be correct so it's not doing weird shit.
Yeah.
But that's the basics of it. You have a pole piece that's the X diameter on the sensor. You have a target on the tooth that's that same size or no more than twice that size.
Okay.
And then obviously you have to have a gap that's at least equal to that. Otherwise, you're going to start seeing the next tooth over before you get done seeing the last tooth.
Right.
Okay. So properly designed crank triggers and or cam triggers don't have problems. Properly designed. Unfortunately, people just throw shit together. They don't really understand what they're doing, and they just throw shit together and it works, and then they put it on some mouthpieces, high horsepower engine, and he's bragging about how good he is at tuning, right? And because it makes all this power, and then they go, oh, look, we got a crank trigger and it makes 3,200 horsepower, and so it must be good. So that's not the case in the thing I was working on. This is a worked out setup, right, that worked on 2 other engines.
Yeah.
But in the end, we were able to figure out that the magnet was incorrectly installed in this only one of 3 trigger systems.
Cam or crank?
Cam. The crank was working, but it was losing the cam. And it was only on this one engine. And it took both of us quite a while, but it's only because both me and Abe think the same and we're used to using Motec.
Yeah.
Whenever we start an engine, right, particularly when we're doing something new to, we capture the cam and the crank signal so you have a reference point to go back to later. So when I did it in Australia, I captured mine. He did it here in the US because it was this cool development thing. We ran the engine on the dyno. I'm talking about Big Mac now. So Big Mac's engine was on the dyno here in the States at Abe's. He ran it on the dyno with the upgraded camshaft and valve spring package that we put in it. Okay. And meanwhile, I had gone to Australia. And I was working on a sister engine in Mac Daddy with Alex Birong down in Sydney.
Yeah.
So he took the tune from that car, because it's literally the same. Fuel system, everything's the same. He took that, and same turbo. It's a sister. It's not, the header is a little different, and the downpipe's a different car. It's a VL, it's not a Pro Mod.
Right.
But the engine package is identical.
Yeah.
So he takes the tune, sends it to me. I stick it in down there. I run it on the dyno. I have some trigger issues with the crank trigger that's on it. And so we switch to a PRP crank and cam trigger, and I do the setup, and we run it on the dyno, no more trigger issues. Like, bitchin', this is perfect. I do everything I'm doing on the dyno, on the VL. It makes the engine here in Big Mac made 2568. The engine there in Mac Daddy, twin sister engine, right? Same Motec ECU, same tune, not the same software, because each one has its own firmware that I wrote custom for them, but the same tune-up, volumetric efficiency curve, all that shit, 2564 over there, right? Which is okay, not a surprise. Same tune-up and same engines, they should make the same. Okay, so, but no more tricks. So then they're coming over here to do testing with Mac Daddy, so I fucking send all of that shit that I figured out about the crank trigger over there, the filtering settings, whether it's rise or fall. I send all that shit back to Abe. He loads it in Big Mac over here. They put that trigger on over here and go run it. Yep, cool, everything works. So we've done it twice. I captured it there. He captured it here. Get to here with the third engine in the car the other day, and it's got trigger issues. And it's like, what the fuck? We just ran 2 of these in 2 different continents, right, back to back, and they had no problem. So it turns out the magnet's in the wrong way around. And it only happens because the engine, like most people don't know this, but there's usually a couple of spots in the cycle where the valve spring opening and position and drag and of whatever's hooked to the crankshaft manages to stop it in the similar position. It's either going to be on this half of the cycle or that half of the cycle where the other half of the engine lines up and stops it. So if you turn the engine by hand, there's a point where the resistance is high. Because it's trying to open two valves at once. One's got the exhaust opening, one's open the intake, or 3 or 4, however many there are. And it gets tight and then rolls past it and it gets loose again. And then it gets
when you
tight.
start to crank it
Not with even the plugs in, just from the valve springs, right? And let alone the plugs being in there, the compression trying to stop shit. So there's usually 2 halves in the cycle on every engine where on this cycle, it's these 2 cylinders, and on that cycle, it's that 2 cylinders. So it either stops on this rev or that rev, but it almost always stops in a similar place.
Right.
So getting back to this. The magnet's in backwards on the cam sensor, on this one. The sensor is hanging out in front of the cam gear. The fucking thing stops with the magnet straight underneath the sensor when the engine shuts off. When you power the sensor back up, right? You turn the sensor on. Because the magnet's in backwards, it like forward biases. It's a Hall effect sensor. It's got its own magnet. But because this magnet is opposing that magnet, it forward biases the sensor before it powers on. And the sensor then starts switching the opposite fucking direction, right? Wow. So normally on the car in once again, this comes down to me having a scope capture because that's how I do it, and Abe having a scope capture because that's how he does it. So we have the 2 to compare to this third one. Our 2 match, and this motherfucker is working backwards. So in other words, when there's no target in front of the sensor, the voltage is high. And then when the target goes in front of it, it goes low. And then after the target moves back out of the way, it goes high again. But the one on this car is low, and when the target goes in front of it, it goes high. And then when it moves past the target, it goes back low again. Yeah. It's flipped. And it's fucking blowing our mind because how can it be? It's not like on a sensor like that, it's a powered sensor. You can't reverse the wires to get the pattern backwards. So how the fuck is it doing this? So just by plugging it in, like first of all, I've seen sensors where they care which direction the target moves through them when it sees the pattern it sees, as to whether they produce a rising or a falling edge when that enters. So what I mean is you take like a GT101 sensor. It cares about the direction that the target is going past the sensor. If you go this way, you get a falling edge. If you go this way, you get a rising edge, right? So that's why you don't use a GT101 on the crank. You use it for a wheel speed, because on a wheel speed sensor, it doesn't fucking matter if you get a little jitter, right? It doesn't make any difference. You get one little tooth out of however many you're measuring, and you're not trying to do anything with it other than measure speed. Right. But when you're trying to accurately derive where the crankshaft is or where the piston position is, more importantly, and you're using a trigger, and the crankshaft, by the way, isn't nearly smooth, right? If you were to look instantaneously at the instantaneous speed of the crank throughout the cycle, it's all over the map because it's slowing down, speeding up. Then it's got one cylinder misfires, then the next one makes 3,000 horsepower, so it accelerates like crazy. And then there's also vibration and flex. And I mean, man, the more you look, the scarier it gets. But you're trying to accurately derive where the piston is based on this information. Right. You can't afford to have a pattern switch itself. True. Right? Yeah. Because the crank did this real quick past the tooth and made it trigger more than once, right? So anyway, it turns out what's going on after we fuck with it for hours, we recognize that, okay, if you hold the sensor in air and take the connector off and plug it in and put it back in front of the target, it does one thing. Right. If you put it in front of the target, unplug the connector and plug the connector back in, pull it away and put it back to the target, it's flipped itself backwards. So it's got something to do with that fucking magnet, right? And that's how we worked it out. So we put the old trigger tooth on the end of the cam, problem solved. So the point of that story, you're a guy with no experience, you ain't got no fucking chance of figuring that out.
You'd be screwed.
Right? That was lucky. That was dumb luck, really.
And then you're complaining about the product and how it sucks.
Oh, yeah. It's a piece of shit. They don't know how to build a cam trigger, and fucking I'm so much smarter than they are.
That's how it always goes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like right off the bat, you got to blame somebody else. Don't ever fucking accept responsibility for any kind of a problem ever.
That's how it is. That's how it is. Why do you think the RB is only operated off just the cam, though? Because they only had a cam. They only came with the cam angle sensor.
Look, so I'm sure this came down to the Nissan bean counters going, well, we could just put one trigger that does both on the cam, and then we don't have to have anything on the crank, right? And then we can save money because we don't have to have two separate sensors. So we'll just use this optical sensor on the end of the cam, right? Which that was a problem too, because on the street car version of that would eventually get dirty and get shit in the because there was 360 slots or 180 slots or something around the outside. They were tiny in this little bitty laser etched piece of like stainless or whatever it was. And you would have, I mean, they were like almost slightly bigger than a hair, the little teeth that it was trying to read. And it was an optical trigger reading through that tooth, like sending light through one side and receiving it in the other. And that's how it knew That's how it resolved crank position.
Right.
But it's not really on the crank. It's on the cam, and there's slop between the cam and the crank because you got a belt that's running one, and so obviously the crank's going to be ahead of the cam, right? Only sometimes, because then you got valve springs that are doing this and forcing the cams to speed up and slow down, and then the crank's speeding up and slowing, because you can imagine this is not a good idea, right?
Yeah.
So only a bean counter would say, yeah, let's just put it on the cam because we can put it all in one unit. But anyway, that's what they did. And then those little slots would get shit in them just from being old, and then it would lose the trigger and it wouldn't run, and then you go in there with a Q-tip and like brake clean and clean them out, and bang, now it runs again.
And then you also have to account for belt stretch too, right?
100%. And keeping in mind that belt stretch, this stuff is all moving back and forth.
Right.
This is not a smooth running signal, right? In general, the crank is what's the thing that is dragging the cams around behind it with the belt. So you could probably say in general that the crank is going to be ahead of the cams because the belt's going to stretch and they're always going to lag. That the crank is what's driving.
Yeah.
But in reality, at any given point during the engine cycle, you've got all of these things happening. The belt stretches and then it slacks and then it stretches and then it slacks. And so the cams are going forward and back and the crank's accelerating and slowing down. And so you've got lots of room for error. As long as you're not trying to be precise, no problems. But if you want to be precise, it doesn't work. Man, if you stand far enough back from a mountain range, it looks smooth. Get up close and it's dog shit, right? So smooth is relative.
Is this the first RB at this level that you've worked on?
The first one that I worked on, it was kind of at a high level, was actually with my customers from New Zealand, heat treatments. And they had a proper actual cast. No, you know what? Take it back. The very first one I did was like 2003 or 4, Carl Stevens Jr. They built a 350Z and they were using an RB26 originally in that engine. And so I tuned it for him on the dyno. And so this is how jaded I've become.
It was a 350Z?
Yeah, it was a 350Z, but they used an RB26. Yeah.
Wow.
Single turbo. So
and what year was this?
Like either 2000, I'm thinking 3 probably.
Wow.
Or it could have been 2.
Is there
maybe
videos
even.
of this?
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. I guarantee there's a video because the first thing that happened is, this is back to the boost numbers, right? I was working on a twin turbo V8 Pro street car.
Yeah.
And so we ran 30 pounds of boost. Well, made 2,000 or 2,400 horsepower or something like that. So to me, 30 pounds of boost was a fucking big number. You don't need to run more than 30 pounds of boost.
Yeah.
So I never worked on an actual import drag car up to that point. And the deal was, him and his dad met me at PRI one year. I was working at the Motec booth and worked for Motec. So that means that it was either 2002 or 2003. And I'm thinking 2002, I started in 1, so 2 would have been, yeah, it might have been 2. So because I was working on that drag race car with the twin turbo, actually the first one was a twin turbo small block. And it was someone that I knew personally before I started at Motec, and they had a Motec, and they're one of the reasons why I went to Motec, because they said, man, this engine management system's awesome. You should see if you could get a job over there. So anyway, they're having, guess what, trigger problems with it. And they keep coming back, and it was an old M48, which was the DOS version before the M800 came out. That became, it was because the M800 was DOS at first too, but like 2002 or 2003, it went to Windows-based software. Anyway, so the M48 is on this car and it keeps cutting off, like it shuts off going down the racetrack. Can't figure it out. He's bringing it in. I first started at Motec in November of 2001. And my buddy's coming in with his ECU to let them pull the data and like look through the data to try and find the problem, and no one can find the problem. And so after about 6 months, I now start to understand enough and know enough that I can kind of work my way through stuff a little bit. And he goes, man, is there any way you'd consider coming out to the racetrack at Bakersfield and trying to figure out what's going on with my car? Because it just keeps like, it'll make 3 runs and then just on the 4th one shut off. I was like, all right, I'll come and check. Well, I get there, I get the laptop on it. One thing that's wrong is the baro sensor it's in error, right? So I'm looking at the pressure for the baro sensor and it's reading 104 kPa. And I'm looking at the map sensor and it's reading 93 kPa. And we're at like 12 or 1,500 feet. So I know we're not below sea level.
Yeah.
Right? So something's wrong with the baro. Now, I'm not smart enough to know if that's really a problem or not, but I know it's a problem. And my background was, working on regular street cars and diagnosing problems on street cars for a hotline center that my dad operated for 20 years.
Right.
So I know when you have a complex problem and you're searching for the answer, a problem that you encounter that seemingly can't be related to the main problem, you can't just fucking leave it a problem because it doesn't seem like it could be related. You fix it.
Right.
Right. And then you come across another seemingly unrelated problem and then you fix that. And then you find one more unrelated. And then pretty soon your whole fucking problem's gone. right? But if you fall in the trap of, well, that can't possibly be, this is fucked up, but it can't be the problem with this, so I'll just leave it fucked up, you'll never get it.
Right.
Okay, so anyway, so barosensor's fucked up. Well, it turns out that the pin pushback in the connector, right, wasn't seated all the way in the connector.
Okay.
So when you plug it in, it pushes the pin back, so it's got no signal, so the sensor's in error, and the default is 104.3 or whatever it was. Fine, push the pin in, bang, that's fixed. All right, what's next? Well, I learned that it's important on an engine that has a single tooth on the cam and multiple teeth on the crank. It's important the relationship of the cam sensor compared to the position of the crank teeth, insofar as a Motec, at least, is using the cam sensor to derive which is the tooth on the crank, since it goes around twice, right? And there's nothing unique about 4 teeth on a crank.
Right.
Could be any 4. It has to see the cam signal first, and the next tooth it sees on the crank is the reference tooth to top dead center compression, right? How many degrees it is to top dead center compression when that tooth arrives in front of the crank tooth. So it's the tooth after the cam tooth happens, right? And it has to be out in the middle of the 2 teeth positionally.
Right.
Because there's stretch in the belt that drives the cam, or the gears, slop in the gears. And because all this shit's shaking back and forth, if you put it right here or right on top of the crank tooth, and then as the crank is jittering around like my fucking fingers seem to be because I had way too much coffee before I came here, if the cam's too close and you get a little slop, it jumps to this side of the tooth.
Yeah.
But the ECU doesn't know that it moved. Right? It just says the tooth that's next is the one that's the reference tooth.
Right.
Except if I have 4 teeth on the crankshaft and I move the camshaft trigger tooth that says the next one on the crank is the one distance to top dead center, if I have 4 teeth on the crank and I move to this side of that tooth, I'm now 90 degrees off. Right? If I move forward across that tooth, I'm 90 degrees off ahead of where I'm supposed to be.
Right.
If I at least just move backwards across that tooth, I'm off by 90 degrees in the direction that doesn't blow the motor up. Right?
Right.
So this was an 8 tooth. I put the lab scope on it just to check because I don't know what else. Oh, I find the TPS. I find slop in the TPS sensor. So I'm watching the throttle sweep because I'm just looking for any problem. I don't know what's wrong. I'm just checking everything. Watch the throttle sweep, and I notice, fuck, there's a bunch of hysteresis in the throttle. In other words, when I go open, it reads open, and then I close it, and it still reads open, and I close it, and it still reads, and then all of a sudden it reads closed.
Okay.
So I'm like, well, that ain't fucking right. So I take it apart and I look, and it's like a screwdriver. It looks like a slot screwdriver and a slot screw. So the TPS is the slot screw, and the throttle shaft has the blade that it fits inside of it.
Right.
Except it's all hored out inside of there from vibration. So you've got this much slop before it starts turning the sensor. So what am I going to do? Go get an old Coke can, cut that, make strips, make a U until it's tight in there, right? And put it back on. Okay, now the throttle works. Fine. So now that's fixed. So now I'm feeling good. I found at least 2 problems. I don't know if they're the problem or not, but hey, I found 2 things that weren't right and I fixed them. So let's check the cam and the crank sensor. So we check them. And I'm like, holy fuck. It's got the cam sensor literally on top of the crank tooth. They're at exactly the fucking same time. So then I'm like, I'm super excited. So just to be 100%, I call my buddy Simon Wagner that also worked at Motec. I'm like, hey, I just found this thing. It's got the teeth lined up. It's definitely not supposed to be that way, right? Like the sink needs to be out in the middle. He's like, yeah, it needs to be out in the middle. He goes, is it offset to one side of it or the other? I said, well, it's a little bit to one side, but it's mostly lined straight up. He's like, okay, so the side that it's a little bit off in front of, move it further that way around that tooth, because that will keep the reference tooth being the same reference tooth that it normally uses. But get it ahead of it and out in the middle of the 2 teeth if you can, so that as it moves back and forth, it doesn't jump across the tooth.
Yeah.
So I'm like, cool. So I do. We go run. It makes its best run ever. It went 691 at 201.75. It had been 201 before. It had never been 691. And they are literally, he is literally kissing me when he comes back. And like, we just made our best. And it never shut off again. 691 at 201.75. It had been 692 or something at like 201.25.
What car is this?
Oh, this is a 69 Camaro Pro Street car. So it's basically a pro mod, heavy pro mod.
Oh, I thought you, I'm like, wait, I thought you were talking about the 350Z with the RB. That's
No. That's so.
No way that.
No. So, listen, to shortcut the RB story, I tuned the thing on the dyno forum. We make like 38 pounds of boost. I think it made 830 horsepower. And I'm like, yeah, it's good. You know, everything's good. You're good. And he's like, it's way low on power. Like, we need more power than that. We need more boost. And I'm like, no, trust me, you don't want to try and run more boost than that. It'll be a problem. Like, okay. So then we go to the racetrack, and I think he was too young or didn't even have a license. I can't remember, but his dad was going to drive the car. So his dad drove the car at E-Town, and we tested it a little bit, and it was kind of, it's got a clutch in it, and they're trying to learn that, and the car wasn't set up quite right yet. But short story, and I think there is a video on YouTube of this, he takes it himself when he's finally able to drive and gets his license. He goes to, I think, it's on I think it was Long Island Dragway on a random test weekend. And he goes and fucking lets the clutch out on this thing. And he had commanded, just make all of it. And it made 50 odd pounds of boost. And I think he went 799 or something like that on his first ever run down the racetrack. And then he just came out, stuck the thing on the dyno, and it made 1,500 horsepower.
On a 350Z?
But it was a RB26.
Yeah.
In a 350Z.
RB and a 350Z, and it ran 790.
Yeah, but keep it in mind, once again, I'm talking about, it's basically a pro street car. I mean, it's like a pro mod. It's like a pro import. It was heavier. It was a 3/4 chassis, but still.
I'm thinking
it wasn't a street legal fucking street car.
No.
Listen, almost nothing I do is a street car.
Where's this guy at?
No, you look, when you're talking to me, if you say car, that means race car, not fucking street car.
Okay. I'm like, ain't no street car running that. That's crazy. Where's he at?
Yeah, no.
Okay, I got you. Damn, that's impressive though. For that year? 2003, you said?
Yeah, no, it was super impressive. It was killer.
So that's basically,
and it was mine. I'm like, it made how much boost?
That's what I'm saying.
55 pounds of boost. I said, oh my god, I can't believe it lived. But that also planted a seed in my head. And I had been tuning based on how I was taught, but it hadn't gelled into my mind to understand that it's really all about physics, and you don't really need to be tuning. You need to be calculating ahead of time and generating a map first that should work, and then just tweak the map to match what it actually is.
Right.
But the reason that gave me a clue was because I'd only tuned it to 38 pounds of boost on the dyno. So how the fuck did he just close the wastegate and run 55 without tuning it and it didn't blow up? Because if the ECU is doing the calculations correctly, and you've done a good enough job with the fuel map when you're tuning, as long as you get it right somewhere and you don't run out of a capacity problem with your fuel delivery system, either from the pump and the regulator standpoint or the injector, anywhere on that slope, if you've got it right, it'll be right everywhere else. Within reason, to the point where it at least won't blow up.
Yeah.
And that job gets a lot easier with methanol. But so then that's how not then, but that's planted the seed that hey, wait, there should be a way to calculate this because it's doing it, right? And what's going on in the background with a Motec at that time, you could adjust something called a manifold pressure compensation. So the concept is that if I take any engine and I run it at sea level, it needs X amount of fuel to run at the correct air-fuel ratio. If I then go to twice the air density, in other words, if I go to 2 bar, keep the temperature the same, then I should just simply need twice as much fuel mass to run at the same air-fuel ratio. So therefore, your density compensation is literally 1-to-1 with air pressure. So that takes the density part of the equation out of the picture. Yeah. And now all you have to worry about is the volume. So if the engine achieves more volume flow at twice the pressure, it's going to require a bigger number in the fuel table.
Yeah.
You've already got the density accounted for, particularly if you do both a manifold pressure and a manifold temperature. Now you have the air component of the air density equation figured out, right? The only thing you're missing is the water vapor, which isn't hardly any percentage at all, even from completely dry to the wettest you could ever be. It's only about 5% swing. Yeah. It's not all, you can fix that with a lambda sensor, or it's within the error level of what you're measuring with. Right. But the point is, if you do the pressure compensation in the background, which is just simply the ideal gas law, very simply, more double pressure, double fuel, and then you do the air temperature compensation based on what the change in air temperature is for any given pressure, what that change in density is. You've got the density part of the equation solved. The speed part of it comes from the crank, and you look at the reference of those two intersection points on the map, and that decides how much fuel based on your air-fuel ratio that you need to put in, right? So if we achieve more volume flow of the engine, we have a bigger number in the table. If we achieve the same volume flow at twice the density, we need the same number in the table. Right? If I haven't changed the volume, I'm at the same RPM and the volume hasn't changed on the engine, and only the density's changed, and I'm measuring the density and I'm adjusting for the density, then I need the same number for the volume part of the equation.
Right.
Then it just takes care of itself.
It'll work out 100%.
And by the way, what you're trying to derive is mass flow, right, against engine speed. That's why there's something called a mass airflow sensor.
Yeah.
If you run a mass airflow sensor, you don't need a Shane T. Literally, you set the air-fuel ratio you want, at any given mass flow and RPM. And unless there's an error in what it's measuring, it derives the correct amount of fuel and runs at the correct air-fuel ratio under all operating conditions.
Well, that's going to be one to digest when I'm editing the podcast. A lot of information there. Cool. All right. So what I want to know is, what do you think from your experience, what do you think the best engine of all time is?
Oh, dude, that's a hard one. Best of all time. Well, I got to tell you, what's really intriguing is a couple of things about internal combustion engines. First of all, they've existed for, at this point, 100 and probably 50 years. Mm-hmm. And we are still finding ways to improve them. Yeah. And part of it's because they're so completely fucking inefficient in the first place. I mean, you basically, for the amount of energy you're putting in, you're only getting about a third of it to actually put to useful work. Mm-hmm. The rest of it makes heat and goes out the exhaust and heats the atmosphere up. So I think that's part of it. But it's really cool that I mean, people like me and everybody in the industry can have jobs still trying to refine and make things better. And we're constantly finding ways. We're getting better throughout with technology and just over time.
Yeah.
But it's also a little bit humbling to think of all of the effort that's been put into making these engines as efficient as they can possibly be, and then look back to someone like Harry Ricardo, at the beginning of the last century, who already had all of this shit figured out using no data logging equipment, electronics. It was all some, hook an arm to the cylinder with another cylinder and put a pencil and let it draw a graph on a piece of paper to get a pressure volume curve. And, that kind of technology that they didn't have. And like the Offenhauser engine. The Offenhauser engine was a fantastic engine to run boost with because it had no head gasket. Why? Because if you don't have a head gasket, it can never blow a head gasket, right? Brilliant. Simpler. Keep it simple, stupid, right? If it's not on the car, it can't be what's wrong.
True. Okay.
So the Offie engine, the cylinder bolted to the crankcase at the bottom, and the cylinder and the head were one piece. So to machine the valve seats, you have to go up through the bore, right? And machine the valve seats from the bore side. So that makes it a pain in the ass to build.
Right.
But once you've done that, now the piston's in there ain't no head gasket. It's a base gasket. And there's nothing to leak above the piston. That's why they ran them at Indy. And that's why they could run fucking 75 pounds of boost on them at Indy and not break them.
Interesting. Okay.
So I would say, of all time, I mean, look, there's probably better engines, but the Offie's are pretty fantastic for when it was built. 4-valve, badass. That's probably the right way. Other than the serviceability, that's probably the right way.
I love that you said that, because it's so different from what everyone else would probably say. They'd probably say some 4-cylinder Honda K Series, B Series, RB2J, 3S GTE, all these crazy, 4 cylinders, whatever.
Keep in mind, the Offenhauser was built for a specific purpose, which was racing. Right. Mm-hmm. The rest of these engines they're all built for a specific purpose also, right, which was a fucking road going passenger car that made fucking 200 horsepower.
Yeah.
Like the fact that you can take any of those engines and make the kind of power that we can make now is fucking unbelievable. You couldn't possibly ever in your life go get a stock big block Chevy, small block Chevy, Ford, and I'm a Chevy guy.
Yeah.
Chrysler. You weren't going and getting any stock fucking engine like that and making 10 times the horsepower that it was supposed to make when they designed it. None of that shit would ever live.
Okay. Now, what do you think the worst engine of all time is? That might be a little bit harder.
Yeah, I mean, look, the thing is, like, there were all of them are, like, a Flathead's a pretty terrible engine.
Okay.
From the standpoint of moving air in it, but they were trying to make 80 horsepower. So, you know what I mean? They had a different goal. So, yeah, I can't really think of one that I don't hate on them. I mean, they're all just
Yeah.
They're just engines, and then when you're adapting an engine that was engineered to do something in a road going car, and trying to use it in a racing application, that's a little bit your fault for trying to use something that it wasn't intended to be used for. If you pick one that's inherently got a problem, that's not really the engine's fault. That's your fault,
right,
for being dumb.
Right. Most people will say, "Oh, this motor is junk because you can't make a certain amount of power in it."
Yeah, because I'm trying to do something unrealistic.
Right. Right. But then it's also the problem is that they're spoiled by other platforms. So you can say, well, you can get a SR20 and make 2,000 horsepower.
Yeah, but then here's my argument to that. Who the fuck is forcing you to use the inferior one? You are, you dumbass. Like, you want to use that one that's a piece of shit, then fucking use it. Why would I use that?
Yeah.
I want to use the best one I can find.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Why work hard? This used to always happen in Sport Compact. Or even if you make a big dyno, oh yeah, but you're spraying it. Well, fucking who cares? Is there a rule? If it's legal to use nitrous and I'm using it and you're not using it, who's the dumb one? Me or you? It's legal.
Yeah, if it's legal, yeah. That's the argument. It's always going to be.
But I did it without nitrous. Oh, really? There's extra points for that because I don't see where that shows up on the scoreboard. I don't understand. Yeah. Or the same thing with boost. Oh yeah, but you had to run 60. We did it at 38 pounds. Well, who cares? Why put a fucking turbo on that can make 60 pounds of boost and then only run 35?
Oh man, I'm sure you've been in the middle of a lot of these arguments.
Oh yeah,
back and forth.
Yeah.
You're just like, I'm just the guy with the laptop.
Yeah.
So you were involved in a VQ build, right? Also,
actually, two. One of them was Vinny 10, right? Performance Motorsport, I think, New York. And then the other one was Carl, because Carl took the RB out after, I don't know, a year or maybe not even a year and started working on the VQ. So yeah, I worked on those two projects. And then Vinny's one ended up getting sold to these guys in England, John Bradshaw. And he brought the car over when Performance Motorsport sort of disbanded. And I think he bought two of the cars actually. And I think there was maybe three, and I think one went to Australia, it seems to me, but I can't quite remember, and maybe I have it a little bit crossed up. But for sure, John Bradshaw had one, and then I helped John Bradshaw a little bit when they were like revising the setup and like new turbos. It came back to New York, and I ran it on the dyno with I remember we switched it to injector ID 2000s because that was the big injector at that time. Before that, it had the Bosch 160 in it that everybody used to use.
What are some of the things or challenges that you face with that? I mean, I don't even know if you face any challenges tuning that car.
No, I mean, the tuning part is not that hard, but in both of those cases, both engine builders had to solve problems because the blocks aren't, once again, you're trying to make fucking 10 times the horsepower it's engineered for. Right. And the problem with like Nissan and some of those other manufacturers, they do a really effective job of analyzing exactly how much material they need to do this job. And they don't build in much safety area because why the fuck would they? It's just costs more and it weighs more.
Right.
So the block is meant for 300 horsepower. We'll make sure it can withstand maybe 350 and then we're done. So I know the blocks specifically were a problem. And they used to have to weld the blocks up all over on the outside and the inside and then remachine them, and fucking then machining them was a problem because they had warped all over the place and getting the bores back straight and the cranks straight. That's a interview Carl Stevens, interview Vinny 10, because they had that problem. Right. I didn't. Right. Like I was just in charge of making sure they ran right, and that was it.
Based on what you said before in terms of how an engine works, and it doesn't matter what platform it is, it's kind of like, well, then you have the same mindset going into any other engine platform tuning it. Yeah,
because once again, there's nowhere where I enter what I don't type in the engine.
This is an SR20,
right?
Yeah.
What the ECU needs to know is what's the displacement, and then what's the efficiency, which is what the map is. You draw the map in as you tune it, right?
Right.
It needs to know what the efficiency is at any given RPM and its original displacement, so it can calculate what the mass flow should be, and then put the correct amount of fuel in to match. And that is precisely how a Motec M1 ECU works. You literally enter the number of cylinders and their displacement. It then looks at the map sensor and the air temp sensor and derives air mass and air density. Yeah. And then looks at the engine displacement and derives the air mass, and then looks at the correction table, which is the VE table, that tells it what the efficiency is compared to 100. And then it says, what's the air fuel ratio goal in the air fuel ratio goal table? And based on the mass of the fuel that you've entered, because you enter the fuel specific gravity and the type, right? Then it can say we have X air mass and we want this air fuel ratio with a fuel that is a stoic number of this, right? So we want 80% of 6.4, which happens to be the stoic number for methanol. And the specific gravity is 792, right? So now we know the precise mass of fuel we require based on the air fuel ratio. Right. So then we take that answer and work backwards into a linearization table for the injector that is the characterized flow of the injector at any given pulse width. It says I need this flow volume based on the fuel density to arrive at this pulse width. So command 2 milliseconds to that injector to get that correct amount of fuel in the engine. So I was talking to another colleague of mine, a guy that I used to compete against, and when I was younger, wouldn't really wanted to talk to him because like he's part of the other team or whatever. Joe Spetter, right? Been around forever, and now we find probably because we're both older and we're less concerned about building our reputation because we've already built them. we find we have a lot more common ground than we ever thought we did. But anyway, I was talking to him. I said, look, because I was trying to use the analysis software to understand, like the engine. Since I'm a kid, I've been thinking about it. I was telling him this. I have like a little movie in my head when I think about an engine. So I can think about any particular given point in time in the 720-degree cycle. I have a little movie I can watch that just instantly shows me what's going on with the valve on the intake side or the exhaust or the inlet manifold pressure, exhaust manifold pressure. I can just roll this movie around, and I mean, I can't come up with complex answers, but for the most part, I can just roll the engine to any particular point in the cycle that we're talking about and visualize it in my head. One valve's open, air's going in this way, some's going out that way. So, but I don't have that with a car chassis, right? Because I'm an engine guy, and I've had to learn all the other shit because I'm trying to get the engine to work and the car won't work. And if you're tuning a drag race car and you haven't run it on the dyno, then you're going to tune it by what it does down the racetrack. And if the car won't go down the racetrack, you can't tune it. And if the tune isn't there, the car won't go down the racetrack. I mean, it's like this give and take, it's this circular loop that you're stuck in.
Right.
So I've only had to learn the car side of it because I'm trying to do my job doing the engine side, and the car won't work. And I happen to be the only one that has any fucking knowledge at all about it.
Right.
I mean, this is not always the case, right? But that's how. So the point that I'm trying to make is that I have this movie I can watch in my head, and I'm pretty good on the engine side, but I'm not that way on the chassis side. I can't visualize it. I don't have that movie to work with, and everything is a question. And I do the typical fucking, well, this should mean that, and this, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Which is why I always normally work with another expert that knows that part, because it's way the fuck easier to achieve your goal if you just hire somebody that knows instead of trying to do it yourself because I want to be the fucking tallest guy in the room, right? Or whatever it is. So
Jordan RK Tunes on his podcast a year and a half ago, he's a tuner as well. And he had mentioned that a tuner is not tuning your car, basically, where his philosophy is you're diagnosing it, basically going through everything, making sure all the sensors are good, everything's done correctly, all the lines are connected properly, and then tuning the car, obviously. But that's basically a tuner's job to make sure everything's running there. You're not just going there, open up a laptop, and just say, all right.
No, you protect yourself and your reputation, right? By going over the basics every single time. Like I say this all the time, and usually I'm setting up a car, right? And or for the dyno, it's something I haven't been through, and everyone's like, I mean, the first thing is I tell somebody, look, if you want me to set your car up and get it running, book me for 2 days. Day one, we'll do it at your shop.
Yeah,
I'll do all the setup and get everything. We'll get it running 100% perfect, and then we'll go to the dyno. If you want to do it the other way around, you're going to pay me and the dyno, and then when we find something wrong, you've paid us both, and you got no result, right? At least if your car's fucked and we can't go to the dyno, I can go home and come back some other time.
Right.
So, but always tell them, like, just so you know, we're not going to do anything for you're going to be like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, because I'm going to go through every single piece that is connected to the stuff that we're doing and verify all of it.
Right.
I'm not taking a map from some other car that I put in and I'll just make an adjustment and fucking go. I'm going through to make sure that every parameter in the ECU, and the problem with that is that with an M1, I could probably run through a completely blank and set up, maybe not super complex, M800, which is the predecessor to the M1 series Motec.
Okay.
I could probably do a base map for an M800 in 25 minutes. And it would be ready to start and run, with the exception of check the timing to make sure that the crank angle matches, right? And just verify the sensors all work before you try and start it. And then it'll start and run and idle, and you can drive it to the dyno.
But they don't give you base maps based on the setup or the engine, basically?
Well, I would I would do it all. I would do it in my head, on the fly. I'm telling you, I'll take a blank one with nothing and set it up for what it is on the fly. And because I'm going to be grabbing pieces and bits that need to be in there in every single one of them, right? Okay. And then turn the M800 into a true VE or close to true VE style control, and do a bunch of math in the background. I need to know your engine size. I need to know the fuel type, right? I need to know what you're doing with it. I have the experience to know where to run the ignition advance and get it in a safe place. And I have the knowledge with the injector flow rate, how to calculate what the pulse width needs to be, the base number. So you just assume the engine's perfect, which it's not. So guess what? If you assume the engine's perfect and you fuel it based on the fact that it's perfect, then when it's not perfect, which way are you going to be on the air-fuel ratio? Go back to this. We have X amount of air mass.
Right.
We know we want to mix this at 12:1 compared to fuel mass.
Okay.
We have an air mass that we know what it is, or we're assuming what it is, because we're assuming it's a perfect engine. So we want this air mass in proportion to this fuel mass at 12:1. So if I put that amount of fuel in and I assume the engine's perfect, and it's not perfect, it's less than perfect, which means my air mass is less than a perfect air mass.
Right.
Am I going to end up rich or lean?
You have less air, so you're going to end up rich.
Correct.
Right.
So then where's the problem? Assume the engine's perfect, fuel it as though it's perfect. You can start it up and run it at full power. And the only way you're wrong is if the engine is more perfect than perfect. Like, in other words, it's 110 or 120% volumetric efficiency.
Right.
So, but you could cover that up by just saying, well, then fuck it. I'll just assume everything's 120% perfect. And I'll always end up rich under every condition because nothing's ever better than 120 or 130% volumetric efficiency. When you consider the density of the air in the background. I mean, obviously you get to more than 100% cylinder filling when you run 2-bar boost. Right? It's got more than its swept volume. No, the volume's the same, but the density's twice. But if you're accounting for that in the background and all we're talking about is the volumetric flow rate of the cylinder, then it's not going to be better than about 130. Now, I've been doing this 25 years and I haven't seen one that's better than that. That's actually better than that. That's not an error created by some other thing that gives you a false value.
Right. Wow. So much that was unpacked on this. My head is spinning right now, but I want to say thank you so
Welcome
much
to my
for,
world.
yeah, man. I mean, there's so much to think about, but since you've been doing it for so long, it's just second nature.
Some of it is, but it's still, I'm always thinking about it. That's why I'm so interested in it. Look, if I win the lottery, I'm going to be doing this anyway. I'm still going to charge everybody. I might be a little bit more picky, right? But yeah, like I love what I'm doing. It's way better than a real job on its worst day, way better. So, I'm always excited about it. And look, what happens to me is like, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and think of something. And it used to be I'd remember it the next morning. Yeah. Now it doesn't work. I have to fucking write it down or send myself a text or send my wife a text or, otherwise it's gone and I don't get it back.
Yeah.
So I have been doing that since I was 14. That's why I'm where I'm at. Because I haven't stopped thinking about it in some capacity since I'm 14.
There's levels to this stuff, guys. And there's a reason why he's here, because he's the man, Shane T. So if anybody wants to work with you, you've discussed your prices already, discussed, all that stuff. I'm not sure if, obviously, you're not going to work, let's be real, you're not going to work on every single project. You may have to choose and why.
Oh, yeah, I cherry pick. That's, of course, yes.
But if they do want to get in contact with you, what's the best way to reach you?
All the traditional ways. By email, shanetech@yahoo.com. That's like my first and last name, SHANETECK at yahoo.com. You can find me Tuned by Shane T on all of the various social media channels, as well as Shane Tecklenburg on Facebook. You can send me a text at area code 714-318-5845, or give me a call and go to my voicemail, and then I'll probably text you and say I'm in the middle of tuning. I'll call you later or whatever, and go that route. Okay. You can try my website, tunedbyshanet.com, aka motorsportcontroller.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for your time. I know we went a little over. I didn't even realize it was 3:30. But you got to get to your
offshore race. Yep.
So hope everything goes well for you and safe travels, man. If you guys are listening and watching, continue to keep listening and watching. Also, make sure you guys head over to streetalpha.co to cop your merch, and we'll catch you on the next one.
More Tuned by Shane T, and you get your Tuned by Shane T merch.
Oh yeah, you can do that too. Yeah, whatever the website.
Hey, thanks a lot for the opportunity, man. I really appreciate it. And I love working in the racing industry. And it takes someone like you promoting the racing industry to keep people spending money so that I can have a job. So thank you for what you do.
I appreciate it. I appreciate the kind words, Shane. Thank you. All right, guys. Well, we're going to head out. Catch you guys on the next one. Peace.
Bye, everybody.